Hello everybody and welcome back to the ASUS PC DIY YouTube channel. This is JJ once again, and as you guys see, I've got a whole bunch of hardware stacked here on our table. And this time around we're going to be tackling something a lot of you guys have been asking about, and once again we're going to be doing a complete from start to finish build. Now we're going to be doing it a little bit differently this time around. We're actually going to break it down into a couple of different sections. So for this first complete video we're going to be focusing on the actual traditional build portion. So from understanding all aspects of the different hardware that we're going to be selecting, how it actually gets incorporated into the chassis, putting it all together, being able to connect everything, get everything actually up and running, getting all the cables routed, and pretty much ending up with a complete hardware-based build completed. But a lot of you guys have asked questions in the past about what about things like the operating system, getting your drivers installed, and pretty much everything that you're going to need to do after you've actually got everything installed inside the system and you have functionally an up and running PC. So we're also going to be covering that, but that will be done in a separate video. So you guys want to make sure to keep locked here to the channel for that content as it becomes available. So first and foremost, before we get to all the ins and outs as far as what we actually have, we're going to give you guys a little bit of theory in terms of what we're going to be approaching for this type of system build and kind of what's our expectation and what are some of the things that you should be considering as you approach building a brand new ATX performance-oriented system. So with that, let's go ahead and go into a little bit more about the building theory. Okay guys, so as we just talked about, there's a lot of different aspects to consider when you actually go about building a system, especially when you're doing it in the way that we're doing it, which is going to be from start to finish and an entirely new system. Some of you guys out there, of course, might be maybe taking just a motherboard, maybe a graphics card, maybe taking just memory, and you could be incrementally upgrading your system to a degree. But when you go about building a system entirely from scratch and you're looking to complete it, there's a lot of different things to keep in mind, whether it's going to be, the form factor. In our case, we're going to be going for a traditional ATX gaming-oriented system, hence the reason why we've gone with one of our ROG, a Republic of Gamers motherboards, as well as some of the other Republic of Gamers componentry, such as our graphics card and the front base and a couple of other items. But with that in mind, you do want to keep those things into consideration, such as what's the form factor. You're going to have three different types of form factors that you can consider, whether it's going to be mini ITX, which is going to be the smallest generally form factor that you're going to have for a chassis, and that would considerably shrink the actual size of the system that you're looking to build. Of course, micro ATX, which would increase it by a little bit, giving you a little bit more flexibility to still be able to do two-way GPU configurations like SLI or Crossfire, or just give you more flexibility for expansion cards, whether they be RAID cards, TV tuner cards, higher-end sound cards, RAID cards, or any number of other different types of PCIe expansion devices. Now, lastly, of course, we have the more traditional base focus, which most builders pursue, regardless of whether they're doing gaming, content creation, general productivity, or you're just looking to have a general high-end enthusiast-oriented build, and that's going to be with the ATX segmentation. Now keep in mind that we are going to be outlining all these different components that we're utilizing in this specific build. And definitely you can go ahead and use these components as a baseline if this is a build that you're looking to mimic on your guys' end. Now we will go ahead and define actually some different recommendations from a good, better, and best base configuration for you guys. So make sure to check the description as well as the corresponding link to the PC DIY website for more information on those builds if you're going to be interested. And I will make sure and also give you guys corresponding PC part picker links if you want to make the process really easy and be able to get all your hardware together in one fell swoop to be able to target those different types of build experiences. So with that, let's go ahead and actually go towards some of the different components that we have here in our system and get a better idea of actually what we're going to be doing in terms of getting this integrated into our chassis. So moving this along, we want to continue to give you guys a little bit more of an understanding of the different points of consideration that you have when you go about building your system. And really two of the biggest ones that are going to affect the overall kind of look, the feel, and the functionality of how you work with your system, especially when you're building one from start to finish, is going to be the motherboard and the chassis. Now, every component is going to actually be very important in terms of your consideration. And if you kind of get a little bit kind of stuck in a rigmarole of trying to figure out which options to consider, or you're not sure which route to go, then of course you can always reference the PC DIY build guides that we post at the website. Make sure to check those out. Now here I've got our Maximus 7 Hero. So this is a high-end performance-oriented gaming-based motherboard, and as you can see, of course, from the form factor, it's an ATX. So it being ATX means that regardless, I'm going to have a certain size chassis to work with, and that's kind of the next portion that you want to consider, is that the chassis that you go ahead and select is really going to define much more than just the general aesthetic. Now here we've got Corsair 760T, and I think that the aesthetic looks great. It's got this really nice black and white contrast, and of course with the side panel windows which have a full frame window, it just gives you kind of this really clean, stylized look that I think just goes great for more kind of gaming and enthusiast oriented based system. But more importantly, on the inside is what really matters, right? In terms of giving us the ability to have a lot of flexibility of how we define our storage array configurations, the room that we might have for larger size graphics cards, the different type of cooling solutions we want, whether we want to be able to just fit in traditional air-based cooling or whether we want to go with more high performance closed loop water cooling solutions, or even true dedicated dedicated water cooling solutions that might have their own pump, reservoir, radiator, and whatnot. So you have a lot of different options that are going to be defined by the size of the chassis and ultimately also the type of motherboard that you pick. You know, in terms whether it's going to be the number of slots that the motherboard is going to offer, giving you the ability to run a single, 2 GPUs, 3 GPUs, 4 GPUs, how much expansion flexibility you have for the storage. These are things that you want to carefully evaluate and are ultimately going to really impact you. And also in little ways that you won't realize as we go through this build experience and we get everything installed here, you're going to see that because of the components that we've selected in our careful consideration, it's going to really be a smooth and easy process. We're going to have a lot of room to work with. We're going to be able to change and configure the layout to really kind of fit the look and feel that we want from our system. And these are things that you want to keep in mind. There's not really a right or wrong decision here. It's really going to come down to what is it that you as a builder want to prioritize for yourself, whether it's going to be cable routing, whether it's going to be compact size, whether it's going to be a huge amount of expansion, all these different points. And hopefully as we go through this build, we'll give you guys better context to be able to understand which key items you want to more carefully make sure to be aware of as you go about picking these components and actually how you go about actually executing on those points when you go through the installation process. So with that, now let's actually go ahead and kick off going through the componentry that we selected specifically for our build. And first off, we're going to kick it off with the CPU. Okay guys, so here we've got the actual CPU. So this is a Core i7 4970K. So this is actually the brand new Devil's Canyon based CPU. So for a lot of you guys that are familiar with, of course, the current kind of state of chipsets and CPUs and sockets, this is a socket 1150 processor, but this is a refresh from the original 4770K, now featuring that new Devil's Canyon based kind of redesign. And really what we're getting here is actually going to be a more consistent CPU margin in terms of the overclocking capability of the actual CPU, in addition to actually a significant bump up in terms of the core frequency. So even by default, you're actually going to be running at a much more aggressive out-of-the-box stock frequency than you were compared to the 4770K. So all the way around for our system, this is going to be an extraordinary CPU for pretty much doing anything that we could ask of it, whether it's going to be gaming, whether it's going to be maybe a little bit of content creation, whether it's going to be web browsing. Any single item that we're going to be doing is going to be running really well on this CPU. Now, of course, you could consider the actual step below this, which would be the 4690K base CPU, and there's also, of course, the Pentium Anniversary base CPU, which are all optimal pairings for the Z97 based chipset. In accordance with that, of course, you want to go back and maybe check those PC DIY build guides because there's going to be different corresponding price points for different hardware that you may want to align with those different types of CPUs. But all the way around, this is not only going to be a fast chip, but it's going to be a great overclocker. You can integrate a lot of flexibility to be able to do pretty much everything we want to be able to get done on our system. So with that, let's go ahead and keep taking a look at the rest of the components we have with our system. So we've just finished talking about our Devil's Canyon based CPU really being the foundation of giving us outstanding performance, great overclocking, and featuring, of course, those refresh based improvements that they've had, including even revisions to the internal IHS and some of the internal composition to even provide a little bit better thermal performance. But of course, to be able to really maximize what we can do with a Devil's Canyon based CPU and to really give us a great foundation of flexibility, features and functionality, our motherboard really needs to be in line with what our kind of goals are at. And with this being a gaming oriented system and an enthusiast oriented system, I want a board that's going to have great fan control flexibility. I want improved quality sound. I want great overclocking, and I want, you know, gamer centric features. And that's really what our ROG series, and specifically this Maximus 7 Hero, is going to get done for you. The board features a class leading power topology design, so it's going to give us more than enough power delivery to ensure that whether we're running stock or overclocked, we've got great power efficiency with great stability in those overclock configurations. We've got all the connectivity we could ask for, whether it's going to be USB 3, SATA 6G, it's got M.2 PCIe support, and we'll talk a bit about that when we actually get to the storage-based items that we're considering, as well as what we're integrating in for our build. And we've got a wide amount of gamer-centric features, whether it's going to be the Intel LAN with GameFirst 3 packet priority software, as well as the improvements to the physical connector in there, giving us actually better protection for static and surge, as well as enhancing our throughput. We've, of course, got the Supreme Effects audio design, which is a hardware-based improvement, helping to really ensure that the quality of what the ALC 1150 can offer is actually achieved, along with a full set of software suite that's available to us on both a hardware level and a software level, helping it to give you a more immersive and richer gameplay environment. And with that, of course, we've got more than enough PCIe expansion to be able to take care of us. We're only going to be focusing on using one GPU, but if you need it, you've of course got SLI-based support on this board. And of course, on the DRAM side for you guys, whatever DRAM configuration you're looking to run, it's going to be supported on this board, and this board is great at being able to run higher DRAM frequencies as well. So all the way around, you're pretty much covered when it comes to the Maximus 7 Hero, and really we're not even covering a tenth of what this board has to offer in terms of features and functionality. For you guys that really want to know what this board is all about, make sure to check out our complete overview here on the PC DIY YouTube channel. With that though, we're going to go ahead and take it over to our Corsair 760T and talk about this chassis and a lot of the flexibility it's affording for us on this build. Okay, so we've gone ahead and talked about the CPU, we've talked about the motherboard, now we're going to talk about the chassis. The chassis really does have a huge amount of influence on not only the look, but the actual feel and the functionality that you have, and really how easy it is to work with your system in the ways that you want to when you go about actually building your system. So we've gone ahead and selected Corsair's Graphite Arctic White 760T. Now they make this same chassis actually in the 730T, which is black and just doesn't have this really cool side panel, which actually exists on both sides, which gives you this kind of framed windowed effect. But if you guys are looking to save a little bit money but not really compromise on the functionality, the expandability, the cooling, and a lot of the things that we're going to be seeing as we go about this build process, I think that's a really excellent choice. But Corsair is really from top to bottom, on entry to high end, got some amazing chassis for you guys to consider. But if we do just a quick little run through of some of the reasons why we've gone ahead and gone with this chassis and how it's going to complement our build, let's go ahead and take a look at it. First and foremost, of course, is that Arctic White with this window-based design. I think it just looks really great, and it's going to contrast, I think, really nicely with the new red and black aesthetic that we have on the ROG series products that are going to be really kind of the focal kind of visual on the inside of the system. So I like that contrast. Now if we take a look here at the front, of course, you've got front mesh intake. So you got that kind of honeycomb pattern design that allows you to go ahead and bring in cool air through the two front fans, which already come installed in the unit, allowing us to bring a lot of cool airflow directly across the inside of the actual chassis and across our components, whether it's going to be the motherboard, whether it's going to be the graphics card, all the way around. We're bringing in a good deal amount of airflow. Now here, of course, we've got this side framed window side panel, and one of the really nice things is, of course, you got this nice easy open access design, and to even be able to remove this when you go about the installation process is just as simple as lifting this up and pulling it off. So it is a very simple process. Now, once we go ahead and get on the inside, you can see that we've got more than enough room to be able to work with the chassis, and it really has all the kind of key things that we would expect. You know, one of the nice things Corsair does is, of course, that they give you an integrated standoff, which allows you to go ahead and mount the motherboard in place without actually affixing any screws. So that's really nice for you guys that sometimes want to work when you install the chassis in a vertical fashion as opposed to laying it flat. So that's a nice piece. Of course, here you've got tons and tons of room in terms of being able to install all your storage devices. You can see here we could go ahead and either adapt these to fit 2.5-inch SSDs, or we could fit in traditional 3.5-inch SSDs. And of course, these are all toolless, but the great thing about them is you can entirely remove them. Now in our system configuration, we're going to probably go for a little bit more simple, clean kind of look, and there are screws, but I've gone ahead and actually removed some of these. But just as an example, how simple it would be is once you remove those screws, you're just going to pull that out, and if you don't want to have these actually installed, it's as simple as just removing those and you're good to go. You can also change these, and you can mount them in different ways. So let's say if I wanted to go ahead and maybe top mount this, I could go ahead and install it in that way. So you got a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can work with this chassis. And when we take a look at the other side, we'll see some cool aspects to it. But down here we can go ahead and put another fan. We've got another fan intake here, and of course we've got our removable fan filter for you guys. So this is going to be always a nice plus, so that you can go ahead and clean your air filters very easily and effectively. And even once again, if we go towards the back, you're going to see that all these have exposed venting. So this is going to be great because it's going to allow us a lot of exhaust airflow to our system. So we've got great intake, we've got great exhaust airtake. And while you guys won't see it immediately right now, but you'll see it later on as we approach installing actually our primary cooling solution, we've got a lot of room here on the top. So this also has inherent venting in there, so you can go ahead and take the cover off of it. You can go ahead and install your standard single radiator, double radiator, even triple radiator based configurations. A huge amount of room and flexibility to be able to work with for all types of cooling solutions. And of course, as I noted on the inside, you've got more than enough cable routing flexibility with all that. Now if we take a look at the other side, we can go ahead and we have another side panel that swings out and gives us access really easily to the other side, and we can see right here we've actually got 4 points to allow us to go ahead and mount in our SSDs, and we've got a nice amount of space right here to be able to go ahead and take all our cable and fit them in there so that when we go ahead and put in that side panel, we don't really have to overtly pressure it. So all the way around, from top to bottom, and even here at the bottom, you can see that it's actually been elevated, allowing us to go ahead and have even airflow come in through here and either be exhausted or pulled in. Gives us a great deal of flexibility. So this is a great chassis for why we're looking to do it, and some of the things to keep in mind also if you're going to be considering a different chassis as part of your Z97 build. So let's keep moving along with some of this other hardware that we've got. So moving things along, here you can see that we've got our graphics card. Now the graphics card is going to be really important, of course, with this being a focus as being a gaming enthusiast class system. Now of course the Devil's Canyon CPU, that Core i7 CPU, does come with Intel's latest generation HD based graphics, and actually they're very solid along with some of the other features that it offers, such as QuickSync technology. It's great, for you guys that are looking to have an entry-level based system that's going to give you some solid 3D acceleration, QuickSync capabilities, and even some moderate gaming. But as we're really targeting being able to go into high resolution, high image quality, and really have a great gameplay experience, we've gone ahead and selected not only an ASUS graphics card, but we specifically have selected an ASUS ROG graphics card. So this is the brand new ASUS GeForce GTX 760 Striker. Now the Striker differentiates from our normal DirectX 2 series of cards, and that it even features a more high-end power delivery and design. It's got outstanding cooling, but yet it remains extremely quiet during operation. And of course, it's got this awesome and aggressive ROG aesthetic, which I think just complements our ROG series motherboard really, really well. So overall, for you guys that are looking for a fast, cool, and quiet card, the Striker is going to take care of business for you guys. And of course, it's also going to give us the same type of flexibility and be able to overclock it in the same way that our Hero board does for that Devil's Canyon based CPU. And for you guys that want to find out even more information about this card, make sure to also check out the overview that we offer here on the YouTube channel for this brand new GeForce GTX 760 Striker. So moving into cooling, we of course have to have a high performance quality cooling solution, and what we've gone ahead and selected is Corsair's H100i. Now traditionally, I would actually probably say be a little bit more conservative in terms of the standard cooling solution. If we were talking about a 4670K or 4770K, while the actual thresholds in terms of the temperatures can be a bit high on those CPUs, especially as you aggressively overvolt them and you want a really good quality cooling solution, part of the reason why you're going to need a more advanced cooling solution is to be able to aid in overclocking. And within the previous generation, although you had a very, very solid margin in terms of being able to have CPUs that could scale all the way up to 4.6, 4.7, 4.8 gigahertz, the actual the margin of the actual CPUs that were available were conservatively small in terms of being able to aggressively hit those higher frequencies. But at the same time, voltage was a big driver to also help to ensure why you might want a quality cooling solution. This time around with Devil's Canyon, we actually have kind of best of both worlds. We not only have that new microarchitecture, but we have actually much more consistency in the frequency of CPUs that are able to reach 4.6 gigahertz or greater. And our internal sampling at this point, actually almost all CPUs we've seen consistently at least be able to reach that 4.6 gigahertz marker or greater. Now the voltage is still a bit varying, and of course with voltage brings heat, and so what we want to be able to have is a great cooling solution. So what we've got here with that Corsair H100i is going to be a double radiator design in terms of having two fans, referred to as the double, but it's a still thinner profile in terms of the overall spacing on the radiator, but we've got flexible hoses, which is great to be able to give us a little bit more flexibility upon the installation. Of course, pre-applied thermal compound, which eliminates a lot of the concern or the debate as to what I need to apply or how I need to apply it. It's going to be matched evenly to work with the cold plate as it is. And of course, we've got two quality Corsair-based fans that are come included already with this unit. Now, traditionally, I would also make note of the type of fans that you would have included to make sure you can control them. But with our motherboard, as we've got the best fan controls in the industry, whether it's going to be a DC or PWM fan implementation, we can control it, tweak it, and tune it within the UEFI or in the OS. Now, just for reference for you guys that are wondering, the great thing about Corsair's fans that they're including with this model is that they are 4-pin, so PWM, which means that they got a great deal of efficiency and are really well optimized to not just give us great airflow, but great acoustics because of that variable nature. So all the way around, we've got a great cooling unit. It's going to give us outstanding thermal performance, margin for overclocking, going to be simple and easy to be able to get installed, and overall get us taken care of when it comes to keeping our CPU cool. So with that, let's go ahead and actually take a look at some of the other accessories that we're going to be using to cool our overall system configuration. So keeping in the theme of cooling, we just talked about that great Corsair H100i, that closed loop water cooling solution, which is going to be high performance, give us a great deal of airflow, and really have a huge amount of dissipation capabilities because of that large large actually radiator-based design. Now moving over to fans, which help to either exhaust or bring in air into the system. A lot of times actually I see builders overspend on actually getting a lot of fans for a system. Really, if you've got a solid chassis like what we have here with the 760T, you really only need a quality intake and a quality exhaust, and as long as you have overall enough ambient kind of air pockets in terms of the chassis, in terms of where air can either be exhausted or intaked in, you're probably going to be solid, especially if you've got good quality cooling for the CPU as well as for the graphics card, which we do have with that Corsair H100i, and of course with that DirectCU2 heatsink and fan assembly design that we have on that Striker graphics card. But with that, this being a little bit more performance-oriented system, I still wanted to go ahead and add a little bit more airflow and give us a little bit more flexibility at how we can go ahead and drive air throughout our system. So we've gone ahead and tapped some of Corsair's AF120 fans. They're great in terms of the overall build quality. I love the fact that they've gone ahead and integrated rubber grommets directly into the actual frame of the actual fan. That allows us really easy ability to go ahead and get our screws torqued in there, and then from there minimize on any type of vibration that would normally resound through the actual frame of the fan, and then also reverberate throughout the chassis in itself. Now there are some cool aesthetics to the fan as well. Of course you can see here it's already got pre-installed the red actual frame, but if we go ahead and we pop this out, we could easily go ahead and change this out to white. You could change it out to blue. And actually, even if you want to maybe go for a little darker kind of maybe stealth kind of build, you could keep it entirely black, and you could go with a black design. So you've got a lot of flexibility in that. But of course, in terms of the actual design of the fan itself, it's got a quality bearing. It's good in terms of the overall CFM, and it's quiet in terms of the operation. Now, I'm always a big guy when it comes down to fan controls, and these are 3-pin based fans, but with our latest generation of motherboards, once again, we can go ahead and define DC based fan control or PWM fan control. Either which way, we can get it taken care of in the operating system or in the UEFI. So these fans, once again, we can go ahead and get installed here, link them all together with all our hardware, and get everything optimally tuned to give us that best balance between cooling and acoustics. So that gets us taken care of from the cooling side. But we do have one other accessory which actually is going to benefit us in the relation to cooling, as well as give us some flexibility and some improvement in sound. So let's go ahead and take a look at the ROG front base. So here we've got the ROG front base. Now, we talked a little bit before about our Maximus 7 Hero and how it actually had a huge number of features, right? Everything from those fan controls to the VRM quality to the advanced UEFI, PCI expansion, and improved sound and improved networking. Well, going back to the sound, as you can see right here, this is a whole dedicated section called the Supreme Effects, where we have a shielded actually codec. We've got the Elna audio capacitors. We have a full isolated section in terms of the audio in relation to the rest of the motherboard. We've even got an operational amplifier in here and a lot of other specialized functions. Now, the one thing to kind of keep in mind is that while this Corsair chassis is an outstanding chassis, the internal actually front audio lead that connects to the motherboard to allow you to actually have front headphone and front microphone can sometimes be of a lower quality, or it can also be impacted by interference from actually devices that are within the chassis, and that can overall affect the actual overall sound quality that you have when you connect your headphones or your microphone to the front headphone or the front microphone ports on the chassis. So what the ROG team developed actually was a new device called the ROG front base. The ROG front base actually comes with this very high quality cable that you see right here. It's a fully shielded cable where we also fully separate the left and the right channels in terms of audio. And this not only improves the overall signal to noise ratio, but improves the actual dB performance, and all the way around makes sure to give you the best quality headphone and microphone experience possible. So really maximizing all the design work that we did on the motherboard by leveraging this actually discrete direct connection where we include the improved cable quality here to be able to make sure you get that best experience possible. Now, if we take a look here at the back, you can of course see that we've got the connections for not only this front audio cable that connects here to the board, but we've also got another cable here that makes a connection to the OC header that's on the Maximus 7 Hero. And what that's going to give you the ability to do is that via those front connections that we have there on the front base, you have the ability to make adjustments to not only, let's say, the fans in your system, but you also have the flexibility to be able to do some adjustment for volume. There's going to be some moderate overclocking functionality available to you, and a whole lot more. And for you guys that want more information on the front base, make sure to check out the overview that we have here once again on the PC DIY YouTube channel for more information on it. But a very cool accessory that's just going to go ahead and allow us to maximize a lot of the functionality that's already built in with this motherboard, and the way that we're setting our system up. It's great to be able to have something that we can easily control that with the front of our chassis. So with that, let's go ahead and keep moving this along. So continuing the theme of performance, we've talked about pretty much every component we have really targeting towards that gamer gamer and enthusiast-oriented focus, and that also goes for our memory. So we've gone ahead and selected Corsair, really kind of industry standard when it comes to high performance overclock-oriented memory, and we've got specifically their new Vengeance Pro line. So the Vengeance Pro line really are actually hand-screened for top quality, great quality speeds, and of course excellent interoperability and compatibility due to the close relationship with Corsair and ASUS when it comes to UEFI tuning. So these are of course XMP-oriented memory kits. They are DDR3 2400 8GB DIMMs for a total of 16 gigabytes. Now for most gamers, I would probably say you're actually more than enough okay to go ahead and pick an actual 8GB kit, but we've gone ahead and selected 16 because since we've got actually an ROG series motherboard and we've got the ROG RAM disk software, I want to be able to go ahead and actually have a little bit of memory left over so that when we go about setting up our system, we can do things like install our web browser directly to system memory, as well as maybe leverage our junction function as part of our RAM disk to be able to go ahead and map different types of applications or different types of folders that I want even faster performance from. Because of course when it comes to memory, that bandwidth and that increase in performance that's afforded to us is going to offer significantly faster speeds than even what the fastest SSDs I'm going to market are going to be able to offer up. So all the way around, we've got a great kit of memory here, and of course we're not going to really be targeting at overclocking this memory, but with Vengeance Pros and that high performance heatsink design that they have on there and those screened ICs, you definitely get to go ahead and even push the envelope further outside of the default memory frequency. But overall, we were just looking for some great quality memory that's going to be stable, run at its rated speeds, and also look great in our system, which as you can see, we've got that red and black to be able to match the overall aesthetic of the rest of our ROG hardware. Now for you guys that of course are wondering about different types of options, Corsair makes a wide range of memory kits, including standard Vengeance-based memory, which is a bit more aggressively priced. So whether you guys are looking for 4 gig kits, 8 gig kits, 16 gig kits, or even 32 gig kits for your Z97 build, they're going to get you covered. So with that, let's go ahead and actually take a look at some of the storage solutions that we're going to be using in our build. So moving into storage here, we've got our Western Digital Black Series, and when it comes to storage, there's a lot of different options, but we've gone ahead and selected the Black Series for really kind of its industry reputation as being kind of that leading high performance, quality, stable, reliable based hard drive when it comes to mechanical hard drive needs. Now the Black Series actually features a lot of advanced based architecture, which you might not normally think is actually going to be available to you in a mechanical hard drive, but Western Digital has really actually put this drive through a huge amount of design effort to be able to give you a product that not only performs exceedingly well, but it's got a great deal of reliability. Everything from vibration control technology to stable track technology to even the high resolution controller helps to improve the overall performance, the tracking accuracy, and a whole lot more when it comes to the inside of this drive. When you pair that off with their corruption prevention technology that they have built in, dynamic cache, as well as the 5-year warranty, it's an easy reason why we've gone ahead and selected the Black Series versus, let's say, their more entry-level Blue Series, which still offers great performance at a more aggressive price point. But also as looking at that this is a high-end system and we're looking to keep it for a longer period of time and also be able to have warranty really across the majority of these products at least being 3 years, if not greater than that. That 5-year warranty along with that advanced architecture and the extra validation work that they're doing with the drive helps us to have extra confidence, especially with this being a larger capacity and really being targeting towards storing the type of content that we're going to have over the longer period of time, and that we don't want to predominantly have stored on our SSD due to the premium spacing that our SSD is going to have. This gives us that great combination of performance, reliability, and stability. So with that, let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of the other storage devices that we're going to be running on our system, namely the SSDs. So moving into very high performance based storage, here we've got of course our SSDs. Once again, we've gone ahead and selected Corsair. Corsair has done a fantastic job at giving you guys a outstanding base SSD with the Neutron GTX. It's actually based off of a very high-end base controller, the Lambda base controller. The great thing about it is that it doesn't care about the type of workloads that you throw against it, whether it's going to be, you know, incompressible or compressible based workloads. It's got outstanding IOP performance, sequential based performance, in pretty much every way you can measure an SSD. It's very, very, very good performance. And more importantly, the Lambda controller also, with the firmware that they contain, has very good long-term read and write consistency. And this is very important because as we go ahead and fill the actual SSD volume, what you can sometimes see is with different types of other controllers that are on the market and the different type of firmware that they may come equipped with, is that it's almost like a scatter plot or a downward diving plot where your performance might start off here, and then over time the performance will actually continue to track downwards. And with the LAM controller and the firmware, the actual read and write consistency, even as you increase the drive, actually maintains much better performance across the entire lifespan of the drive as well as the entire capacity of the drive. In addition to that, Corsair has also implemented a great SSD toolbox, which gives you a lot of flexibility at being able to work with the drive and even increase over provisioning if you even want to maximize performance even more. So all the way around, you get a great quality drive in terms of its performance and the overall feature set that it has to offer to you. And we've gone ahead and selected a 240 gigabyte because of recent pricing adjustments. It's still a little bit more expensive choice compared to some of the traditional base SSDs that are using SAN4 based controllers, but because we're focusing a longer term build and we really want the best performance possible, we're stepping up to the GTX and paying a little bit more of a premium, and also targeting, like I said, 240 gigabytes because that's going to give us a lot more space to be able to keep in our operating system, all the core drivers, some core applications, and even those games, so that we don't have to be going back and forth between our SSDs and our mechanical hard drive. Now, I've got two drives here, and of course we're going to go ahead and set up our system, but not always is RAID going to be something that I recommend, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go through the installation process. But for me, whether you're going to want to run two volumes, one as a backup or one as actually paired with the other drive in a RAID 0 combination, giving you the flexibility to go either which route is what we want to enable for this type of system build. So we're going to go ahead and target two of these drives. Now lastly, we're going to go ahead and cover one more form of storage, which is actually going to be optically based. So let's go ahead and check out our actual Blu-ray combo drive. So lastly here, in terms of storage, we got something that probably 50% of you are going to be split about and the other 50% of you are going to want. And that's going to be an optical drive. My personal recommendation when you go about for a build is still to definitely include an optical drive. I think it's easiest in terms of just being able to go ahead and get your Windows operating system and go ahead and put it into the drive and go ahead and complete an installation. Although with you being able to now take your Windows operating system, mount it onto a flash drive and install via that fashion, you can have even a slightly faster USB installation time. But you know, I've clocked in installation via an optical media in as little as about 6.5 minutes, so it's still extremely quick, even compared to a USB 3 flash route, and just overall giving you the flexibility to install your drivers that also come included with the actual motherboard. It's just going to give you more flexibility. But there's also going to be some other aspects. You know, I'm a guy that really appreciates high-end quality, so I'm still a big fan of actually optical-based discs, whether it's going to be in CDs or whether it's going to be in Blu-ray. And having a Blu-ray combo drive gives me the flexibility. I can rip my Blu-ray, have it digitally stored. I can go ahead and also watch it directly on my system, or of course I can go ahead and play back CDs, which are recorded at a higher bit rate and have higher quality than compressed-based audio, or I can also go ahead and rip it into digital formatting. And that complements the different type of usage models that you may have. Maybe you do a little bit of streaming on Spotify, but you also still pick up your CDs and you also maybe watch your Blu-rays. But all the way around, it's a great option to just be able to give you flexibility and a fail-safe. And lastly, some of you guys forget this as an option, but backup is always something that you want to keep in mind. Now, normally you would want to have some form of mechanical storage or some even type of flash storage to be able to back up your content, or you could of course be utilizing the web via the cloud-based service. But with that, there can be limitations at the amount of time that it takes to actually upload your content. I love actually having either a Blu-ray combo drive that either has DVD writing capabilities or Blu-ray writer that can write Blu-ray discs, because it's a great and easy way, and it's also a cost-effective way to intermittently back up files that are extremely important to you, whether they're going to be photos, whether they're going to be videos, or even whether really important game saves. It's a great way that you can go ahead and just burn it off, store it to a disk, and be ensured that you're going to be able to have that disk and even come back to it years later and still be able to access it easily and effectively, and know that you have a great amount of lifespan afforded to you on that device. So all the way around, I think that an optical drive is a great choice. And lastly, as you guys that have checked out videos that we've done in the past that talk about UEFI optimization and giving you the fastest post and boot time, you do know that you need devices that support UEFI across the entire chain, meaning a motherboard, a graphics card, a storage device, and an optical drive. And ASUS is currently the only vendor that across all its active optical drives has UEFI enabled firmware, which means that you can go ahead and effectively and easily make sure that you set up your system in an optimized post and boot policy. So with that, let's go ahead and check out our power supply. So as you guys can see here, we've got our power supply, and power is unquestionably an area that you don't want to compromise on. It's extremely important to not only pick a quality vendor, but ensure that you have an actual power supply that meets your actual environments, as also meets the needs of how you're going to be defining your system, not only in the immediate term, but also across the long term. Now, we've gone ahead and selected pretty much one of the flagship based units from Corsair with the AX860i, the I representing that it's their digitally power controlled unit. This is an awesome level of flexibility that Corsair is giving you afternoon that you can go ahead and connect this directly to the motherboard, corresponding internal USB header. And once we go ahead and do that, we have full access to be able to see full digital readouts of our power delivery and control. And especially for kind of a tweaking and tuning and overclocking oriented system, having that level of granularity and control at however the system is working is very, very, very cool. Now, of course, there are some other great benefits that we have with this type of power supply. And first off, you can see that it's a fully modular PSU, meaning that there's no connections. This is going to allow us to have the most flexibility and really the best ease of use when it comes to about actually installing this and getting all our cables routed. Now, this power supply already comes with very high quality sheathed black cables, but we've gone ahead and actually gone to the next level and actually gone ahead and gotten some of Corsair's custom red cables. Now, I think these just add a whole nother layer and kind of pop and really cool aesthetic to the system. Totally, we don't need them for any performance-based perspective, but I think that they look amazing with our red and black build, and it's a great option that Corsair offers right now to their enthusiast grade line of PSUs. So one last point that we want to still talk about when we're covering the power supplies, you know, we've referenced a lot of different aspects when it comes to the modularity of the power supply, the acoustics, the management capabilities, but of course the inherent quality. Now, they've got an amazing actually electronics topology on here to really give you great efficiency, minimize jitter, great ripple performance, and a lot of the other characteristics that are very important in terms of giving you a top shelf PSU. But efficiency is of course one of those other metrics. This being a platinum based PSU, it's pretty much there at just about the top of the charts in terms of what it's going to give you in terms of efficiency. And that's also important to keep in relation, not only in terms of the total wattage power output that you're going to get as you actually go under load, but also how that directly translates towards your power bill. And of course, the more efficient that the power supply is, the better performance you're going to see in that respect as well. So in that regard, also, we're getting great performance. Now, for you guys that, like I said, might be wondering about different options you have available to you, Corsair has a wide range of silver, gold, and platinum, and even greater base power supplies that are available to you with wide degrees of flexibility, whether it's going to be semi-modular, fully modular, or with units that have fully integrated base cable connections. And for you guys that are looking at those options, don't necessarily consider those as not good options for even cable routing. Just means you have to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more intelligent about how you route things out. But all the way around, great choice to be able to ensure that we have great stability and power foundation for our system built. So let's go ahead and keep moving it along. Okay, so lastly, we've got a brand new form of storage that some of you guys might not be familiar with. Specifically, it's going to be M.2. Now, M.2 is kind of a new chipset related specifications being supported on Z97 series motherboards. And what we've gone ahead and done is selected one of the best options that is out there right now in the marketplace from Plexstore. Now, Plexstore is a very solid storage quality vendor, and they've done some great things with this M6E M.2 base SSD. Now, they make it in actually multiple capacities, 128, 256, and here, the one that we have here is a 512 gigabyte. But the big advantage that you have here is going to be a native PCIe based connection, meaning that it's not limited to the performance and throughput of what's offered by SATA 6G or the SATA 3 revision specification, meaning that we have significantly higher throughput than what's offered on a traditional SATA 6G based SSD that's connected to the PCH ports that are going to be on the motherboard. So this is ultimately just going to give you faster performance and overall the best experience possible when it comes to storage performance. Overall, a really great choice that's backed up by a great deal of work that Plexstore has done at giving you something that's reliable, consistent in terms of performance, and really featuring some cutting-edge technology, featuring Marvell's latest generation 9183 based controller, as well as toggle-based NAND, and of course customized firmware, which helps to maintain performance across varied states of the drive. So all the way around, a great drive to be able to go ahead and leverage if you're looking for a simple and clean and accessible build, but also while not compromising on performance and while even offering faster performance than any other standard form of storage device right now. So with that, let's go ahead and lastly take out a couple of key accessories that you're going to need when going through your build experience. So lastly here, we've got a couple of key items that you're also still going to need when you actually go about the building process. Now, you're going to need definitely for sure a screwdriver, but the other ones aren't necessarily required, but I think they're going to actually give you a little bit of an easier time when you go about through the build experience. So first off here, we've got actually a quality screwdriver. Don't underestimate the quality of the screwdriver that you use when you go about the build process. It really actually impacts how easy it can be in terms of actually having access and angle flexibility, as well as actually minimizing the likelihood of stripping or having threading based issues when you make contact with the screws that you're going to be experiencing across a wide number of the devices that you go about installing into your system. Now specifically, I've always made a big preference towards considering high quality tools, so Wiha or Bakko. Bakko is a subsidiary of Snap-on, which is a great tool vendor. This one is great. It's actually got ratcheting built in, so it makes minimizing torque Actually very, very easy, and it's also got a built-in LED light. So if you're doing a little bit in a darker environment, maybe at an angle, you can go ahead and just depress that, and then from there you can go ahead and see a little bit more effectively. And of course, you can go ahead and pop this guy out, and it's got all its internal bits in there. Now, in the last couple of builds, I've used WeHot, their ESD-based series, and I'm a big fan of ESD-based tools, meaning that you can minimize any type of static discharge. This is not an ESD-based tool, but with that, if you've got a good, generally static-free type of environment, then you don't have to trend towards an ESD-based tool. You can also save yourself a little bit of money, but the option is yours. From there, also, I've always recommended that I'm not the biggest fan of zip ties. I tend to prefer actually Velcro. I think Velcro, one, you can not only reuse it time and time and time again, but it's far more flexible at being able to go ahead and deal with different types of sizes for different types of cables you can run. And I also think you can get a little bit more flexibility and sometimes the color and the look and the feel of it. So I've got some nice red Velcro here, which I think is going to go really cool in terms of just giving us a nice contrast to know where everything is actually cable tied in our system. And you can get them actually for a pretty reasonable price, and it's also a little bit more environmentally friendly than the plastic that's generally utilized for zip ties. And lastly, right here, we've got a Neotic ESD Technician mat. You can get these actually at a couple of different places, and there's different types. You can go online, you can find different types of ESD or tech-safe mats. I'm a big fan of them. I find that they're a high-quality surface to actually work on. I tend to actually have a little bit sweatier hands, so for me, also they have a little bit of a semi-absorbent material to them, so it helps to minimize that for me. And also, they are great because compared sometimes to a table where good quality tools actually have anti-roll-off, where you can see actually I can't roll this screwdriver. It's purposely designed to not allow it to roll off of a table. But if you're using certain items, sometimes it's better off to put them on this type of mat as well because it minimizes them rolling off. And also, I feel it's a heck of a lot easier to see screws and different items on these type of mats than sometimes you might have on different types of surfaces. So overall, I think with these couple of items, it gets you taken care of in terms of making sure that your build hopefully goes as easily as possible. So with that, let's go ahead and get this build started. So starting off our system build, as we can see here, we've got our Corsair 760T chassis. And so one of the first things you want to go ahead and do when you go about building your system is just getting actually a sense of how everything is going to get laid out, and also understanding the nature of how your chassis works in relation to airflow and where the components are going to be placed. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and take off this side panel right here. Now, we've got the same chassis. That's one of the really nice things about it, is that you can take off the panel and just gives you a whole kind of more great deal of flexibility of being able to work within your chassis. Now you can see right here, this is the primary area, of course, where the motherboard gets installed. And of course, right to the right-hand side of it and directly below it is where we would go ahead and run all our corresponding cables for, let's say, PCIe power, SATA power, motherboard power, and everything else. Now, what we kind of have to decide on is going to be a couple of configuration-based parameters within our chassis, and that's going to relate to the storage level flexibility. Now, earlier when we showed you, one of the cool aspects of this chassis was the modular nature of the hard drive trays, right? And so we went ahead and we top installed it there. But remember, we're only using one 3.5 inch hard drive, so we don't actually need the secondary hard drive case. So just for overall openness and maybe even for a little bit of improvement in airflow, we can go ahead and remove that. And one of the great things is actually removing that gives us access to be able to install another fan here at the bottom of the chassis. So that's one thing right off the bat that we can go ahead and take advantage of. Now, as we're going to be running one actually 3.5 inch based hard drive, then we know that we are going to need to maintain one hard drive cage. And here in the back, of course, we have 4 openings for additional 2.5 inch based devices. So that's where we're going to go ahead and mount our SSDs. Now, we've got 2 already pre-installed high performance fans that are already integrated with the chassis, and we've got, of course, where we can see here the fan leads are coming from. And you do want to keep this in mind, just because overall, as we look at the motherboard, we're going to want to make sure that we're keeping cognizant of actually all the fan connections that we actively need to run to the board, so that we can make sure that we know that we put them in the right places. Now, here at the top, of course, in the front, we've got, of course, the openings that we're going to have for our optical drive, as well as for the ROG front base. No issues there. We've got 3 drive bays, so the ROG front base is going to take 2 of those drive bays, and then the top is going to be taken up by our optical drive, so that takes us of care there. Now, here at the top, if we go ahead and evaluate a couple of things, as we're not using a traditional air-based cooler, we're going to be using actually a closed-loop water cooling solution with the Corsair H100i. We also need to figure out actually where we're going to be placing the unit, but that's pretty straightforward in terms of that it will be heat mounted here in about the center. And we just need to figure out where we'll go ahead and drop down the actual cold plate, which makes contact with the CPU in relation to the CPU socket on the motherboard. Now, you can go ahead and get a little bit interesting when you lay things out like that. You can go ahead and orientate it either to the left or to the right. That'll be up to you in terms of how you want to go about that. And partially that affects a little bit of kind of the aesthetics of the system, so that's something to keep in mind. And of course here we can see that we don't have a back mounted fan, so if we have the back mounted fan we want to go ahead and add, we have to account for that as well. But overall, no big concerns that we're seeing here that we're going to have to consider that where we need to make considerable adjustments or revisions to how we're going to be working with the system, because it gives us a great deal of flexibility. So let's go ahead and keep moving this build along. Okay guys, so we're officially kicking the actual build off. And before we get things started, one thing that we're going to go ahead and do right here is, you can see right here I've got a list that I've gone ahead and printed out. Now I always try to save the environment, so I should actually kept this on my tablet or kept this on a notebook. But what we've gone ahead and do to make this process easier for you this time around is also you can actually download the exact checklist of what you want to make sure and 100% do as you go about building your system. And you can get this checklist directly from the PC DIY website. So that's pcdiy.asus.com. So you can download this checklist and then you can work with it hand in hand to make sure that you're going step by step to make sure that you cover each exact one of those aspects when you go about building your system from start to finish. And if you miss one of those things on the checklist, you know that you may not actually have a system that's going to be optimally set up or may not be functional. So hopefully this will make the process a little bit easier for you. So first up, we're going to go ahead and actually go about the process of installing our CPU and referencing it against the CPU socket on the motherboard. So let's go ahead and get this started. Okay, here guys, so I've gone ahead and taken out the Z97 Hero. So I've gone ahead and just placed it here on top of my motherboard box and I'm good to go. And right here we can see that we've got the CPU socket. Now here I've got my Devil's Canyon, my 4970K CPU. Now traditionally it's going to come inside of a box, and so of course we would have opened up the box and we'll be good to go. Now there's a couple of key things that you want to keep in mind in terms of the handling of the CPU itself. Now if I go ahead and pick up the CPU, I want to go ahead and minimize ever making contact with the pad. So the pad is going to be the underside right there. Minimize making contact with that, because as you know, you've got minerals and you've got oils and all kinds of different things that are on your fingers and all kinds of different types of surfaces. So try to minimize putting anything on that, because that can impact the actual pad and the socket contact, and it can affect things like memory initialization and a whole number of other variables. Now, I'd also strongly recommend, if you guys have not, before you even go through the whole build process, check out the video that we did on the PC DIY build site that talks about what to do before you actually physically install your system into your chassis. We go through actually step by step a number of key things that really help to make sure that you're going through the best steps to be able to make sure that all your hardware works before you actually get to the point of installing that in. Now, assuming you've gone ahead and gone through that, let's go ahead and go through these steps here. So first off, you can see right here we've got our CPU socket. All I'm going to do is go ahead and put my finger directly here on the actual retention lever. Now once I go ahead and put my finger on the retention lever, I'm going to go ahead and swing out and then lift up. Now once I gone ahead and lift up, you're going to see that there's slack, and I can now go ahead and lift up from here. Now once I've gone ahead and lift up from there, I can go ahead and pop this out. And once I've gone ahead and popped that out, you don't want to throw this away. You want to make sure and keep this. In the event that you maybe have to ever RMA your motherboard and send it in for service or something along those lines, you want to be able to go ahead and put this back in place to be able to protect the actual CPU socket itself from getting damaged. Now at this time, if you haven't checked out that video like I talked about that goes through all the things you want to do before you get everything installed in your chassis, you want to visually inspect the CPU socket. Make sure that there's no bent pins. We go through a very, very strenuous and detail-oriented process in production to validate and ensure that when we ship out a board that it doesn't have damaged pins. But there's always seems to be people that contact us and let us know that they actually have damaged pins. So at this point, before you've done anything, you want to verify this and make sure that everything's okay. Now the next step is to go ahead and get your CPU and then get ready to install it into the CPU socket. Now you do want to keep in mind that right here, if we're taking a look at the CPU, that you have two notches. Those two notches will correspond with actually two reception points that are in the CPU socket. Now for us, what we want to go ahead and do is match those up and get it installed. So I'm just going to go ahead and lift it from the top and the bottom, and then literally just go ahead and drop it right in there. So it's a pretty simple process. I went ahead and did that pretty fast. If you got to go a little bit slower, it's entirely okay. I would minimize holding it from the sides. It tends to be a little bit more difficult, and you have a little bit more open spacing here at the top and at the bottom to be able to go ahead and drop it in. Now once you've gone ahead and done that, all you want to do is go ahead and put the retention plate back over, and you want to keep this angled up because you want to keep the actual slack in place. And once you've gone ahead and done that, it will rest over. So that retention plate will rest over the actual sides of what's called the IHS. So the IHS is the integrated heat spreader, and we're now going to go ahead and take that retention lever, and as you see here, now as we push it forward, we're going to be eliminating the slack, and we've got more resistance. We're going to keep pressing down, keep pressing down, keep pressing down. Now you will feel resistance. That resistance is entirely okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and swing out and insert in. At that point, I've now successfully installed the CPU. I'm going to go ahead and run through that one more time just so you guys can kind of keep track of that for you guys that are kind of watching this very carefully. I'm going to go ahead and depress down, and I'm going to swing out to lift that up. Okay, do that process slowly. Don't do it exceedingly fast, because sometimes if you do it really fast, the CPU, actually retention plate, can just kind of pop out. It'll explode outwards. It won't physically fly out anywhere. It's just a question that it'll abruptly kind of pop out because of the pressure from it being pressed down. So now I want to go ahead and make sure that it's aligning, see, with that open spacing right there. And as I push down, it's now going to go ahead and insert itself in there. So push down, and then as you get down to about 90% of almost down, you want to swing out and then put in. And once you've gone ahead and done that, we now have the retention plate in place over the IHS, and we've now successfully installed our CPU. So now that we have our CPU installed, the next step would traditionally be to consider what type of thermal compound, or how you would be handling thermal compound or TIM installation in relation to your cooling solution. Now, if you remember earlier, we went ahead and selected Corsair's H100i. So this closed loop water cooling solution actually already has the thermal compound already installed on the cold plate. So we don't actually have to do anything. So this is already creating an optimal spread of the actual thermal interface material to make contact with the IHS to be able to go ahead and give us great conduction of heat from the IHS to the cold plate, and overall give us a great contact to be able to ensure solid cooling performance. Now, for some of you guys, you might be wondering about, should I go ahead and maybe wipe that off and apply a higher quality thermal compound or a higher quality thermal interface material? And that's entirely an option that's available to you, but you do want to keep in mind that all the advertised performance numbers, generally all the reviews that you've looked at, and all the numbers that the vendor actually corresponds to their unit have been achieved with the thermal compound that's actually included with the unit. So that's an important kind of aspect to keep in mind, that it's pretty much a minimum, a non-negotiable in terms of that performance that they're ensuring with that optimal contact in place, because they've already pre-applied it for you. Now, in addition to that, different actually types of thermal compounds sometimes have different types of viscosity, and they have different types of properties which may not always align with every type of cooling solution. So it can also add some complexity if you go about pick different choices, whether or not it's going to be optimally the right choice to go with your thermal cooling solution. Now, that being noted, there are definitely a number of different types of good aftermarket thermal interface compounds that you can utilize should you want even a higher performing solution. But keep in mind that it's generally only going to be a marginal improvement. For you guys that are absolutely looking for the best temperature improvement, then you can definitely get a bit more, but you're not necessarily going to have a game changer in terms of the actual thermal performance increase. So with that, we're not going to go ahead and focus in on that. If you guys have more questions on how to actually go about the specifics of applying thermal compound in relation to a more traditional type of heatsink installation, then you want to make sure and check out our previous video that covered exactly how to do that. Okay, so now that we've gone ahead and already got the CPU installed, the next step would actually be to go about installing all the cooling related hardware. So that would be, getting the thermal compound applied, getting the CPU cooler installed, and getting mounted into the chassis and whatnot. But there are a couple of things specific to our scenario that we want to go over. So first and foremost, normally when you get everything unboxed, you're going to unbox, of course, the closed loop water cooling solution here, the H100i. And then you're going to have a bag that has all your corresponding screws. Now, what I've gone ahead and done to make it a little bit easier is you want to go ahead and just jump into the manual. And when we go into the manual, you're going to see that there's going to be a page that pretty much looks something like that. And that page has all the information as far as what each corresponding screws that you need. So we only need the Intel, we don't need the AMD. So I've gone ahead and separated all of that and laid that all out, and you should do the same thing. Now, normally, what I would recommend for you guys is to use a magnetic tray. You can get them online, they're very inexpensive. I keep a whole bunch of them around, and they make things very easy for me to be able to have them on a desk and not fear of something bumping the desk and having the screws roll away. But if you don't want to spend that money and you want something that just kind of works, you can include the actual styrofoam padding that they have. And if you notice, what I do is I just insert all my screws into that. It makes it easy because I can move things around and they're still there. Now, it doesn't work for the washers and it doesn't work for these nuts, but if you wanted to, what you could do is you could go ahead and put the washer and then you could go ahead and push that in, and then you wouldn't have to worry about losing that piece. So you could keep them together at all times. And that's a worry, because sometimes if you drop one of these guys on the floor, you're going to worry, it's like, oh man, where did it go? So it can be a little bit tricky. So you can do little things like that, but they make the process easier. It's very easy to see the black against the white, and you can see I can just pull it out. So that's the way I like doing it, if you guys want just like a quick little tip as you go about the installation process. Now, the next thing is that if you follow the actual manual, the manual is going to actually tell you a couple of different things that I'm going to tell you not to do. And this is, I feel, ultimately for the best kind of configuration you can have and how you can be able to control and set up everything in relation to the cooler with the motherboard. And so there's also going to be another bag here that has a fan connection. So a fan connection that plugs into the actual power for the actual the water block right here. So this water block has these power points that are in there, and then they give you this little adapter here, as you can see here, that you would plug like fan headers into. And I wouldn't use these. That's just my opinion, and the main reason why is because I don't want to have to go through secondary software to make fan controls. And we've spent considerable time and effort to give you guys very, very advanced fan controls, including even automatic fan calibration in the UEFI and the software. And I want a one-stop shop. I want to be able to control my CPU fans, my front intake fans, my back exhaust fan. I want everything to be able to control it in one singular place from the motherboard. So don't use any one of these, is pretty much what you need to do. It's going to actually make your installation process that much easier, because all you need to effectively do is that the fans that come included with this will be connected to the front CPU fan and the CPU optional headers. So that's all you're going to really need to do in terms of actually connections for what's going to come off of the closed loop water cooling solution. Now lastly, you're going to have two connections here. One's going to be the SATA power, which will be for the pump, and another one will be actually RPM detection. Now for you guys that are really critical and want to monitor RPM detection, then this is an option you have, and you can plug it into a corresponding header. But depending on the number of fans that you want to be able to power from the motherboard, I feel like this is wasting a header. So if we take a look at our chassis, we're going to effectively pretty much be using every single header to actually control and drive a real fan. So for me, I'm not even going to connect this RPM detection header. But it's up to you. If you want to go ahead and utilize it, you can. Just keep in mind that you're going to lose that functionality of being able to drive and control an actual fan if you do go ahead and connect that. So once we've gone ahead and taken care of that, the last step to be conscious of is the cold plate itself. The cold plate already comes with thermal compound already applied onto it, meaning that we don't need to worry about anything. We just can go ahead and get in our base mounting hardware. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. So we're going to set this cooler aside for right now, and we're going to go ahead and get started on the process of getting the mounting hardware installed. So we've got the back plate right here. So this is what we're going to need, and we're going to need these 4 screws right here. So all we're going to do is go ahead and affix this underneath to the underside of the board. And as you can see right here, there's actually spacing that can be accommodated to adjust the correct CPU socket size. Generally, it's left right now on socket 1150. So as you can see right there, we're just going to want to line it up with the corresponding holes. And like I said, you may need to adjust that to be able to fit into those. So once I've gone ahead and accounted for the fact this one's actually not and the right, I need to go ahead and adjust these. So I'm going to go back and tweak these, and then we'll go ahead and we'll get that reaffixed to the back of the board. Okay, so we've gone ahead, and here you can see we have the bracket. As we noted, the spacing was right. So right here you can see that actually it's indicating to you that there's 1366 all the way down to 1150X, right? So we need to make sure that these all come in down, essentially that they're all pointing inwards. Once they're all pointing inwards, then they'll fit correctly on the back of the backplate of the board, and that'll get us taken care of. Now you also see that there's this small little indent on each one of these sides. You want to make sure and pay attention to that, because while you could potentially put this on upside down, optimally it has to have this indent working in relation to the back of the backplate. So I'll show you actually what I mean by that. So let's go ahead and take the board. And now that I've gone ahead and taken the board, here you can see that you have the actual primary backplate, right? We're going to take this backplate right here for the cooler, and you'll see that it actually inserts with those indents. It fits into place right there. And once we do that, we need to, once again, kind of move that into the space, and then we're good to go. So while you're doing that, now I'm going to try to do this for you guys. We'll flip it back the other way around, and you need to take those screws, and you essentially need to thread them in there into each one of the corresponding points of the back plate to essentially
get it in place. And usually I go with opposing angles. It helps to make sure that you don't have one side bulging out over the other side. Okay. Got 4 in total we need to get in there. And then we've got 1 more. Okay, so we'll take that one right there. Get that last one in. Okay, so now we've gone ahead and successfully installed the back plate. Now, you could have done this with installing the motherboard into the chassis and then accessing the back cutout that we actually have here within the chassis environment. But I find that it's easier to work with the board a little bit more flexibly just from being able to kind of tilt it and work with it, especially when it comes to this back plate, as opposed to having the board fixed there and me trying to kind of look in the front of the chassis and then pull back to the back. Now this chassis makes it very easy to do that, but I find that it's an easier process to do that. In the same way that the actual manual is generally going to recommend that you install the CPU cooler first and then do the backplate implementation. I generally find it's best to do the backplate implementation first and then consider how you're going to go about actually mounting the CPU cooler. So with that, let's go ahead and keep moving along this installation of your CPU cooler.
Okay, so we've gone ahead and successfully now installed the mounting backplate onto the motherboard, allowing us to go ahead and actually attach the cold plate from the closed loop water cooling solution. So the next option would be a couple of different steps. Traditionally, they would tell you to probably install the actual closed loop water cooling solution, possibly the motherboard, a couple of different items. It really actually depends on your different type of layout and your considerations. So I think in our specific scenario, first off, it actually would be best to install the fans onto our actual radiator for the closed loop cooling solution. Main reason being is I find it a lot easier to be able to install these fans externally here than it would be to go ahead and, for one, mount the water cooling solution here at the top and then attempt to put in the fans in place and then screw in the fans in this fashion in a vertical form. I find it much easier where I could pretty much just put them down here, flip it like this, and then screw them in. So it's going to be much easier for me to do that, and I think much easier for you guys. Now, in terms of the way that we're controlling the airflow, these are not actually set up as an exhaust, they're actually set up as an intake. So what we want to do is actually we want to bring in all the cool air that we have sitting on the external ambient side of our chassis down through, coming through this actual venting, and then coming through here, the actual radiator, giving us the actual best thermal performance for our cold plate. And then what we'll do is we'll have the actual back fan installed as an exhaust, helping us to pull away some of the heat that's going to be centralizing in this area and exhausting it outside of the system. So that's how we're going to be controlling the airflow. So let's go ahead and now just install these two Corsair AF120 120mm fans. Now these are different than the fans that come included. These are the AF120s that we went ahead and selected earlier, and we've gone ahead and picked them just for their aesthetic purposes, but the fans that you would go ahead and have included with the default unit are going to work fantastic, and you don't need to change those out. Here we've just changed them out purely for the aesthetics that we're going to go ahead and be working with. So let's go ahead and get this installed. And one thing that you do want to keep in mind is that when you do lay these out, you want to try to position the actual fans you can see right here with the actual fan cables coming downward, because once you have this actually installed, you want to try to minimize the actual length of the cable where it's going to be coming out towards to be able to connect optimally to the CPU and the CPU optional headers, which is where we're going to be connecting these to be able to control them from the motherboard. So I'm just going to go ahead and now select our screws. Now the nice things here about these AF120s, so the AF120s, I don't have to use the actual washers that you would traditionally have to use because they already have the rubber grommets that are actually built into the actual fan frame. So I'm just going to get that screwed in and be good to go. And same thing like you traditionally do, you want to try to make sure to angle these off, you know, just to minimize pressure being built up too much on one side. And I do recommend that when you're screwing these in, don't abruptly just screw extremely quickly. You do want to try to make sure that you actually have the screw in the correct thread hole, because sometimes what you can do is if you're just screwing down and these aren't lined up correctly, you could actually be screwing directly into the grill, the fan, the radiator itself, and you could damage the actual fan radiator grill. So you want to be careful when you line these up that you're actually screwing them into the right place.
See right there, if you notice the spacing came a little bit off, so I'm just going to actually lift, make sure that I'm actually in the right spot before I keep going in, and then I will continue to screw it in. Because if not, you can then sometimes end up inadvertently, like I said, screwing into the radiator. And you could damage the radiator, you could compromise some of the effectiveness of its cooling ability, a couple of different things. It's easier to always just make sure to take your time. Now, that's one of the nice things here about this also. Ratcheting screwdriver makes the job a little bit easier for me in terms of when I'm torquing it down. And you want to minimize here with the integrated rubber grommets as well. You don't need to overtly over torque it too much, just because you'll have a little bit more play than you would against a traditional fan frame. With a traditional fan frame, it would essentially be some resistance as the screw comes down, but when you have this integrated rubber frame, you can see that you could begin to actually push it down. And if you begin to lose some of this shape on this, so I'll go ahead and maybe tighten this one up a little bit more, you'll see it compress down a bit more. As you see this compress, if you're compressing it too much, it means that you're driving it too much. And you would just want to pull back a little bit. And another little tip, it's not a big one, but it is a nice little tip. I've noticed that with some of these that actually have integrated rubber grommets, or they have silicone grommets of some type, I usually will actually lightly lube them with like a WD-40 or something like that before I get it installed. Some of the times they can be very dry, and over time sometimes I've seen some of them crack. And so if you actually lube them up a little bit, you can help to minimize that. Especially depending on your ambient heat, your ambient temperature, it's a little bit more prone to do that. So sometimes just giving it a little bit helps a lot. Okay, so from there, we've pretty much now got all of them in place. And from there, you just need to go ahead and decide where you're going to go ahead and mount it. So you can do a soft mount positioning. And in most situations, I would probably say you want to try to minimize having the cold plate and the actual cables running through the right-hand side and probably through the left-hand side. So if you imagined we put in like that, that's going to work out pretty well. It's also going to allow the Corsair to sit where it's supposed to be in terms of being able to read it in the correct orientation. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and now lay the chassis down, and we're going to begin the installation of this actual closed-loop water cooling solution. Okay, so we've gone ahead and successfully installed our fan, so we're good to go at this point. So we've gone ahead and now laid down our chassis, so flat, and I'm going to go ahead and position this closed-loop water cooling unit inside this unit with the actual cold plate and the cabling on the left-hand side, so closest to the back 120 millimeter, 140 millimeter exhaust portion of the chassis. And so I'm going to move over to this other side, and we'll go ahead and get everything screwed in. Now we can see here that this chassis is nice in terms of working with our H100i, because there's actually rubber grommets that have already been installed in place that align it with that actual cooler. The great thing about that is it minimizes us having to use a washer, and we can just go ahead and use the traditional screws to get it, go ahead and mount it in. So let's go ahead and get that installed. All right guys, so here we've gone ahead and we've got the cooler already on that side, so we're just going to go ahead and get it lined up and get this started. So go ahead and sit it in relation to where I need to. I need to go ahead and line these up here. And once again, you want to be very careful once you line these up, because you don't want to screw into the radiator. You actually want to screw into the threads. And so once you've actually got one in there, you want to go back in and double check and make sure that that's actually lining up correctly. Okay, and same thing, usually what I'll do is I'll go one opposite, just to try to make sure that proportionally at each extreme, right, so at the front and at the back, I more or less have one screw in place, and that will kind of make sure that the spacing across all these is okay. Plus it gives you a little bit more flexibility that you can move your hand out of place, and you can go and more easily get the rest of these in there. And nice thing there with that ratcheting screwdriver, I can go ahead and just put that in. I don't even need a screw, I can just go with the body and Very easy, especially with the rubber grommets, can minimize the likelihood of over torquing. So I have really, really, really good control over how much I'm going for each one of these screws. All right, two more to go, and we are going to be good to go. And one last one. Okay, and that's pretty much it in terms of that. I'm just going to go ahead and physically check it. It's not moving, so we're going to be good. So we're going to go ahead and head back around and move it back up. Okay, so we've got the H100i successfully installed into the chassis. Now, one of the cool things that Corsair has done is the actual top retention plate that goes on top of the actual cold plate, so this the integrated pump and cold plate, this is actually magnetic. So all we're going to need to do is literally slide it over it, and it will clip automatically into place. So it makes the process very simple for us. So we've gone ahead and done that. Now that little plastic part fell. I've been trying to keep that in place. Usually I would also recommend affixing some tape to the sides until you're ready to go. Main reason being is that we do not want to touch that thermal compound that's already been pre-applied. So we want to make sure until we've actually got our motherboard installed that we keep that cover in place. So next up from here, hopefully stays in place right there, we're actually going to get ready to almost install the motherboard, but not quite yet. There's one critical part that a lot of people actually forget, and that's the installation of the I/O shield. So first up, we're going to go ahead and get the I/O shield, and then we've got a couple of considerations in terms of both memory and integrated storage for the motherboard before we get it installed. So let's go ahead and first take care of our I/O shield. Okay, so next up here we've got the I/O shield, a very important part that a lot of people forget about. And all we need to do is pretty much just, here's the I/O cutout. So we're just going to go ahead and move this in. And there's an indent in place. We just need to line it up with that and then just press up against each corner until you hear it snap into place. So once we've gotten that in place, it should be entirely flush. So we're just going to go ahead and now look, make sure it's entirely flush and snapped in. So now we've successfully gone ahead and installed our I/O shield. So now that we've gone ahead and successfully installed the I/O shield, we're going to go ahead and install the memory. Now you could have installed the memory with actually having the motherboard installed into the chassis, but I found that once again it's easier to do this outside of the chassis than it would be to do it inside of the chassis. So that would be my recommendation. Now the other thing that you want to keep in mind is that you want to reference your manual. Your manual actually will detail to you something that which pretty much looks like this, which is actually a memory diagram that shows you what is the preferred channels of operation depending on how much memory you're installing. As we're installing actually two DIMMs, is recommending that we use channel A1 and B1, which would be the black DIMM slots. So that's where we're going to go ahead and install our memory. As far as memory goes, it's a fairly straightforward process. When we take a look at the actual memory DIMMs, you're going to see that there's actual notch for the memory. And if we take a look once again at the actual DRAM banks themselves, there's also a notch in the DRAM banks. Now it's very important that you do not want to make contact with those actual, the bottom side of the DIMMs. Once again, those are the contacts, and just like the CPU, you have minerals and oils and things like that in your hands that can cause actually memory initialization issues. Additionally, also beforehand, you do want to check those DIMM slots and make sure that there's nothing internally or sitting inside of those, because that can also impact the memory initialization and it can cause problems. But as everything is free and everything's clean, I'm just going to go ahead and pull those guys back. I'm going to go ahead and get my memory installed. So it's as simple as that. I heard the 2 clicks and I'm good to go. And a nice thing with our QDIMM design, meaning that there's only a latch that you have to lock in on one side, it's a very, very simple process. So I'm going to take my second DIMM, go into the second slot, push down pretty much evenly, both sides, and that's it. And you can see, of course, the amount of leverage that I can go ahead and press down. It's far easier to do it equally on both sides, on laying the board down flat and outside of the chassis, than if I was inside the chassis and had it vertically raised up, and I would probably have to do something like this, which would be a little bit harder. So overall, this is an easier process. So now that we've got the memory installed, we're not going to be, by default, be utilizing the M.2 PCIe storage, but we're going to show you how you guys would actually go about installing it if you did want to leverage an M.2 as part of this system build configuration.
Okay, so next up, we're going to go ahead and talk about installing an M.2 base SSD. So here we've got that Plextor M.2 base SSD, and right here at the top portion of the motherboard, we have the M.2 actually connection. It's a very simple process. All we're going to need to do is go ahead and remove one screw. And this is what's referred to as a 2280 based M.2, which is the actual length. And I'm just going to go ahead and set that screw aside. And from there you can see that there's actually two interconnects that are offered on the M.2 based SSD. And I'm going to go ahead and just angle that in there. And I'm going to hear the depression. Then go ahead and push down. So I've gone ahead and pushed down. I know that it's resting in place. I'm going to grab my screw. And I just need to go ahead and hold that portion down. And screw it into place. And at that point, you have successfully installed the M.2 base SSD. So a very simple process if you want to be able to leverage an M.2 base SSD as part of this build. Okay guys, so now we're getting to a really big part, which is actually the installation of the motherboard into the chassis. But there's a couple of things that we want to keep in mind. Once again, we want to have made sure to actually install our I/O shield, which at this point we have. We've already installed our actual CPU cooling solution. We've got the memory already installed. And as I noted earlier, if you were using M.2, you've already got M.2 installed. Now at this point, what you would want to go ahead and do is actually check and make sure that there's corresponding standoffs inside the chassis. So here we can see that we've got one standoff at the top, a second, and then a third. This being a traditional ATX-based motherboard, you're generally going to have 3 points. So one at the beginning, one at the middle, and one at the end, and then 3 rows. So we have 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 9. So we're going to need 9 screws. But Corsair's actually done something great, which is actually the central screw already actually has a threading built into it, which is going to allow you to go ahead and mount the board in place, even though you haven't actually screwed anything in. So this makes actually the installation process a bit easier, as you don't have to worry about holding the board in place necessarily, while then also screwing in those other screws into their corresponding standoffs. Now once again, just to verify on the motherboard itself, we're going to go ahead and take our motherboard. And when we lift it up, if we take a look here on the board, such as in the top or in the middle, you're going to see that there's standoffs. So here you can see one. If we move towards the center, we have another. And then as we move towards the end, we have another. So there's going to be each corresponding standoff on the motherboard is going to relate to the standoff points that are inside the chassis. So at this point, let's go ahead and actually get it mounted in, and we'll go ahead and get the screws affixed as well. All right, let's go ahead and get this board installed here. Just going to go ahead and frame it in, make sure it's seated there. Okay, once we've gone ahead and done that, make sure we're just going to go ahead and get each one of our screws in place. One, and same thing, usually go about corresponding, opposing sides, just to make sure kind of we have a, we have a balance to how everything's getting put into the system. I'm just going to go ahead and rest a couple of these others in place. And if you have the ability and the dexterity to go ahead and thread them a little bit into the mounting holes yourself, then you can go ahead and do that. One. Get another. And then one last one here. Three more here at the top. And the main reason why I generally don't affix it to the screw head, even though it might hold in place, is I don't want the screw to drop. That's the main reason why I do it this way. Sometimes I have to end up holding it there. So, okay, and we got one last one that we're going to get put in there. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to kind of hope it holds here.
Okay, at that point we've gone ahead and successfully mounted the motherboard, and we can go ahead and lift it up and continue on with the installation of the rest of our hardware. Okay, so now that we've got the motherboard installed, we're going to go ahead and actually mount the CPU cooler. And I've gone ahead and removed the DIMMs. Some people may actually be able to go ahead and turn the thumb screws in position and get them actually tight enough with the DIMMs in place, but depending on your dexterity as well as kind of the thickness of your fingers and whatnot, you may need to remove them. So just for reference, I've gone ahead and removed them here. And I'm just going to go ahead and take off the protective plate and go ahead and line it up with each one of the screws right there. And once it's been lined up, I'm just going to go ahead and take each one of our corresponding thumb screws and screw it down. And right now I'm just kind of going for finger tight, not really torquing all the way down, just enough to get it in place. Now one trick, if you want, is that this cable right here, if you really wanted to kind of make it really elegantly disappear, you could go ahead and unscrew this heatsink and slide it underneath that heatsink and then route through the back. But I think it'll be good enough that we can just go ahead and route it in between the portion of the heatsink and the DRAM, and we'll just go ahead and run it out through there. But for you guys that want to have really, really precise cable management and cable routing, you could go ahead and do that. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and get my screwdriver and finish screwing these in place. And you do want to be careful that you do not want to over torque these. If you put too much pressure between the CPU pad and the CPU pins, you can sometimes create memory initialization issues. So you just want to be careful to not over torque these, just enough to make sure that it's got a snug and tight fitting, but not an exceedingly tight connection. Okay, at that point we've gone ahead and made a successful contact and completed the installation. So let's keep moving this along. So first up, we're going to go ahead and install this bottom fan right here, and we're just going to want to make sure to keep in mind that for cable routing purposes, we want this cable to go downwards so that we can go ahead and pull it through the routing hole that's at the base of the actual chassis on the inside. Okay, so let's go ahead and get it installed here. And just for reference, I'm going to be bringing this in as an intake. So I'm going to be bringing in some of that cool air that we have from the bottom, and I'm going to bring it actually up through the chassis. That additional airflow can actually help with the GPU-based design that we have, because with the GPU, you want to be able to draw in air into the GPU so that it can go ahead and cool the primary heatsink and fan assembly. You could also actually go ahead and put it as an exhaust, and it would minimally help to go ahead and pull out maybe some of that heat buildup that exists in that area. And the choice is really kind of up to you in that configuration. Neither one is going to really massively impact either things, but I want to be able to bring in a little bit more airflow, so that's the direction I'm going to be going. From there, you just need to go ahead and get things lined up. Okay. And once we go ahead and get it lined up, just need to go ahead and get that screw into place. Now the screw might have a little bit of pushback, just because the nature of these grommets, sometimes they don't kind of always feel like they're going and they're screwing in evenly like they might if they were screwing into an actual thread. So just kind of keep that in mind. You can kind of look at the screw afterwards and see if everything's kind of seated in there correctly or if something seems to be off. And I find that usually holding it in place helps to make sure that it's optimally screwed in. Go back and tighten those up. Okay, and from there, we've gone ahead and successfully installed our fan.
Okay, so before we go ahead and install our last actual fan that we need to, which is going to be right here, the back exhaust fan, we've got our PSU, and we just want to quickly detail some of the considerations here. So this is a fully modular PSU, so as you can see right there, means that we have no active connection. So we're going to go ahead and manually be selecting the cables that we're going to need to be able to go ahead and connect everything. So at this point, you can begin to go ahead and define actually all the number of cables you're going to need. So you'd want to count everything from the 24-pin motherboard power to the actual CPU power that's going to be at the top of the board, two SSDs, which we're going to have. We're also going to have a 3.5-inch mechanical hard drive. We're going to have the optical drive, and we're going to have the ROG front base, and all the fans are going to actually be running off of the motherboard, so we're okay there. And then lastly, of course, we have the graphics card. So what you want to go ahead and do is that once you get your cabling, whether it's going to be the cabling that comes already included with the power supply, or in our case where we've gone ahead and got the custom red sleeved cables from Corsair, we just want to go ahead and select all of these. Now, one thing that I do recommend is always try to give yourself a little bit of a buffer, whether it might be maybe an extra serial ATA cable, whether it might be something odd like an optional Molex connector, because maybe in the future, maybe you end up needing something that requires a Molex. And also same thing, while our system is only going to be configured for a single GPU, I would always recommend end up incorporating a second set of PCIe connections. Just because when we get towards the end and we actually cable route everything and we have it all defined and pulled through, it's going to be much easier for you to just have a cable that you're not seeing that maybe we just have pulled back, that we could go back, reinsert, and then if we have that secondary GPU over installed, we can just pull through and make an active connection for it. It's a much simpler process than you having to go back, try to actually make the connection when the power supplies are already installed, and then try to figure out how to effectively run that back through all your cable routing and have it look clean and organized. So give yourself a little bit of flexibility to be able to grow with your system over time and account for possible upgrades. And of course, in the same thing, once we actually go about making all these decisions and defining what we're going to need connected, we do actually want to make all these connections beforehand. Now, you can go ahead and decide to either make those connections at this immediate point right here, or you can make it outside. I generally find that it's going to be easier to make at least 2 to 3 to 4 maybe even connections externally outside, and then finish with the last couple of ones internally, as opposed to trying to get my hand to fit into this tighter area where I also have the fan already installed and try to fit those all individually in due to some spacing restrictions. So once we've gone ahead and defined all these, we can go ahead and make those connections and then get that installed. So with that, let's go ahead and now circle back, finish off the actual installation for our back exhaust fan, and then from there we'll move to getting this power supply installed. Okay guys, so next we're going to go ahead and install our back 120mm exhaust fan. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind that sometimes make things a little bit easier for you down the road when it comes to the cable routing is that here you can see I've gone ahead and just taken one of the actual Velcro cable ties that I have and just tied it off and shortened this up a little bit. You could also use a zip tie or something along those lines, up to you. Sometimes the actual fans will already actually come with some form of cable tie in place, shortening this out, and that's just to minimize the amount of extra actually fan cable that you're going to have potentially hanging when you go ahead and angle it. And also make sure to orientate it in the right way. You know, a couple of different options you could go is you could go ahead and take this cable and actually run it around the fan itself, and as long as you align where that fan cable is going to end, you could go ahead and pull it against and then insert into the fan header. So a couple of different options to do it, but I'm just going to go ahead and tie it off like this, and it'll pretty much drop down at about that location that I'm going to need it to be in. So we'll just go ahead and mount it right here. And same thing like before, at least with these AF120 fans, you just want to kind of be careful when you screw them in. You don't want to over torque them too hard just because of the internal rubber grommet that is part of the frame. If you're going to torque that down too much, it can cause the rubber grommet to kind of move a little bit out of place. All right, so just going to get a couple of them here in place, and we should be all right. Okay, got 2 of them in there. Same thing, usually just from opposite ends. And you can see right there, we're pretty flush. We're now pushing it in. And just get our last 2 in there, and we're going to be good to go. From there, we'll go ahead and finish getting our power supply leads connected, as well as beginning to route our actual PSU and get that installed into the chassis. Okay, at that point, we've now got our back 112mm exhaust fan installed. Okay, so next up here, we've got our power supply, our Corsair AX860i. So this is our digital platinum power supply that we're going to go ahead and get installed here and begin the cable routing process, at least from a basic perspective. Now, normally you want to go ahead and get the power supply installed and then kind of optimally align where you're going to route each one of these individual cables. But as we know, we're going to at least need a couple of them. We're going to go ahead and connect the baseline connections that we're going to need. So we've got one for the motherboard, and then we have another for the CPU. So the motherboard is a 24-pin power connection, and so that's what we're going to go ahead and utilize. And you'll know that this is the motherboard end because it's one fixed block versus the end that actually goes in on the power supply end, which actually has two independent blocks. And then for the CPU, generally it's going to be a fixed 8-pin block, so that's going to be for the CPU power. So those are an absolute requirement in terms of getting our system up and running. So we're just going to go ahead and connect these here. You can see that we've got them mapped out where we've got 24-pin ATX specifications, so we're just going to go ahead and plug that in there. We're going to be good to go, and then right next to it. So that's going to give us our 24-pin motherboard power, and then we've got our 8-pin CPU power. And so you can see pretty much from here, any one of these can serve as that, and these also generally correspond to the PCIe power. Now from a cable routing perspective, it depends on how you get this positioned in, that you may want to go ahead and either to the right or to the left, depending on where you want to swing the cable out towards, so that's something you can kind of keep in mind. So we'll just go ahead and go from here, and we'll check it once we get inside the chassis. And from there, we'll go ahead and begin the routing process and get the rest of the cables in, as we can go ahead and verify the number of components that we need our connections for. So let's go ahead and next up get this guy installed. So one last step before we go ahead and actually install this power supply into our chassis, and that's going to actually be the connection for our Corsair Link. So this is what's going to allow us to actually have the advanced digital power management and monitoring control functionality that Corsair enables with their I series of power supplies. So it's a very simple process. As we see right here on the back, there's actual special connection point for one end of the cable, and the other end of the cable will go into this control node. And then this node has a USB interface cable that will actually plug into a USB 2 internal header. So we're pretty much going to be taking care of all our USB internal headers, because we're going to have one that's going to be for the ROG front base, another one for here, and then another one for the two front USB 3 ports that we have on the chassis itself. So let's go ahead and make this connection. You can see it just kind of goes directly in there. For you guys that still remember what a floppy Molex lead looks like, this is pretty close in terms of kind of almost looking like one. And once we've gone ahead and fixed it in there, we're good to go, and we'll just need to install this. Now keep in mind that to be able to enable all this functionality, you will have to download Corsair's software once we actually have the operating system installed to be able to enable all the functionality for what the I series of the power supply offers to us. So let's go ahead and move this in there and keep moving our build along. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and actually install our power supply, but there's a couple of things that we want to keep in mind when we go about the installation process. As you can see, this power supply actually has a fan on it, and because of that, that actually means that we have to evaluate a little bit how we want to be able to work with our chassis. Now this 760 chassis and a large number of high-performance chassis on the market generally have the area directly underneath the PSU. It incorporates some form of actually venting, and so that actually allows you to either treat it as an intake or as an exhaust. Now if we were to go ahead and put in the PSU in this way, keeping the fan actually up, right, this is going to make cable routing not exceedingly difficult, but it's going to force these cables to actually be on the outside, so the external portion going outwards of the chassis towards the internal portion. So that means you're just going to have to pull a little bit more as opposed to keeping it a little bit tighter and cleaner on the inseam of where you're going to be pulling in towards. So that would be in this location, pulling in towards these areas, right? The benefit of doing it that way, though, is that this will then work as an actual exhaust, meaning that the hot air that's circulating in this area will actually get pulled down in, and then it will be exhausted through the back of the power supply. So that's actually usually my preferred installation method. Some users prefer not to do that because they want to keep the power supply independent of the airflow configuration. With a very high efficiency and high quality component power supply like this, you don't really need to worry about that, even if you're increasing the internal temperature a little bit. And the fan already designed is already quite good in terms of the acoustics, that you're not really going to be impacting its overall noise output. But if you want to go optimally, then the other direction would be that you would flip this over, and when you flip this over as so, the fan is actually going to be going down. So as you can see with this chassis, it's got actually exposed, the underside of the actual chassis is exposed, allows air to come in
to the PSU, actually cool it, and then it will be exhausted back out. And so that gives you maybe a little bit better thermal efficiency, a little bit better load performance for the power supply. But already with such a good quality power supply, I don't find that that's going to be as much of a benefit. The, I think, greater benefit will be that, as you can see, is that the cables have now all moved towards the left-hand side. So if we go ahead and install this in, we'll be able to pull actually a little bit more easily, and it'll be a little bit more clean. So either option, actually, it's up to you. There's not a right or wrong way to go ahead and do this. It really comes down to your preference as far as how you want to define it for your chassis. As I noted, let's go ahead and just try it out this route, which is going to be allowing this to go ahead and pull some of that heat away from our GPU. I think anytime that we can pull away a little bit more heat away, that's always going to be a positive. So we're going to go ahead and try this out and see how it works for us from a cable routing perspective. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this power supply installed here. Hold that in place right there. We've got our 4 screws. We're just going to go ahead and get these lined up here. And same thing like always, you want to minimize over torquing these just enough in terms of just making sure that it's screwed in. All right, so we're just continuing to get these screws in here. And same thing, you usually go about opposite ends. All right, and then one more to finish it off. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, perfect. We are good to go there. So next up, let's go ahead and finish taking the rest of the cables that we have and start to actually see how they play out in terms of pulling these in and seeing if our orientation works out for us within this chassis configuration. Okay, so now that we've got the power supply installed here, we're just going to go ahead and begin some of the initial cable routing. And we're just kind of trying to make sure that everything more or less works, check our lengths out and things along those lines. So we've got, of course, the CPU power and we've got the motherboard power, so 24 pin and 8 pin. As you can see right here, this is the 24 pin right up here that we're going to have for the motherboard power, and then up here in the upper left, we're going to have the actual CPU power. So that's where we're going to be running towards. But overall, as a whole, you just want to kind of keep in mind where everything's going to be running towards. If we have our SSDs over here, that means that we're going to need power. It's going to be kind of feeding out to where the SSDs are at. We're going to need power that's going to feed out and going to go to the back over here, which is going to go to one of the mechanical hard drives. We're going to have an optical drive, and we're going to have the front base, which will need corresponding power, so it'll be up here in this section. So you just kind of want to start to map out and realize everywhere you're going to get. And of course, then the graphics card, once it gets installed in there, we'll also need a PCI Express running out from there to connect to that. And that helps us to pretty much make sure that we get everything set and good to go. So let's go ahead and just feed these through. And when you're feeding through, there's 2 different ways. One, you could go from the shortest distance, which sometimes might crimp in the cable a little bit, or you could go for a little bit maybe more of a kind of like a natural curvature to the way that the cable gets routed. So you can see right here, we have this rubber grommet, and we have a cable route point. So you can go ahead and pull through there, and that's going to keep it really tight. It might not maybe look as clean, whereas maybe if you went through here, you're going to have a little bit more of an arch or a curve to it, and that's really kind of up to you from an aesthetic perspective. Me, I usually like to try to go to the least point of resistance as far as the amount of length that I have to play with. So I'm just going to feed it in through there. We're going to feed 1. So we're just here, we're just adjusting the rubber grommet, making sure it looks clean, and we're good to go. And that's it. Now, as I noted earlier, if you decided you want to go ahead and turn this into an intake and you flip it over, this cable routing is going to probably look a little bit just cleaner, just from the fact that this is going to be on the opposite side, but overall it's going to look pretty close to it. So we're going to go ahead and keep it this route because, like I said, I like the fact of exhausting, essentially pulling that out and exhausting it out of my system, essentially having 2 exhausts, especially because these are also serving as an intake as well. So with that, let's go ahead and keep moving this along, and we're going to focus now at getting our optical drive and our front base installed. Okay, so as you can see right here, we've got our ROG front base. So this is our front control interface to allow us to go ahead and do things like a quick charge, USB, be able to have a high quality microphone and headphone connection, go ahead and be able to adjust the volume, be able to adjust fan controls, a lot of different things like that. So there are 2 connections that we're going to need to make. So if we take a look here, we've got actually one which is going to be for the high quality audio cable. And then we've got another, which is going to be for the OC panel header. So we need to go ahead and connect both of these. And once we go ahead and connect both of these, then we'll go ahead and install it into the front chassis. Once it's in there, then we can go ahead and route them to the motherboard. So let's first go ahead and get this one connected. So this is going to be for the OC panel header. And the other end will connect to a connection point on the motherboard. And then this is our high quality audio cable. So this is going to be for the headphone and for the microphone. Okay. Okay, now that we've gone ahead and connected both of those, we have a third connection point, which will be for the power. Now, because I think that the SATA power connection sometimes can be a little bit tricky to go ahead and connect, I'm going to go ahead and get a serial ATA power cable, and we'll connect it, and so we'll have 3 cables, and then we'll go ahead and install the front base, and we'll feed through those cables and get them to their corresponding points. So let me go ahead and get one additional cable. Okay, so we've got our serial ATA cable right here. Now we can see that this is a long form serial ATA cable, right? And we've got multiple connection points. Now keep in mind that the optical drive is going to go directly above this. So if it goes directly above this, what we would want to ideally do is maybe use one of these serial ATA connection headers so that we can have the other one actually loop up to connect power to the serial ATA. So I'm going to go ahead and use, I'd say maybe the third one or possibly the fourth one to make sure I have enough clearance. Actually, probably the third one because we still need enough length to be able to go ahead and run up hopefully to the optical drive, and then the other end, of course, is going to need to connect to the power supply. So let's go ahead and try that configuration out. So before we jump into this configuration mix, we just want to keep a couple things in mind. As we noted that with the serial ATA cable that we have, as it's kind of going to probably be just right about the right length, we're also going to need to install the optical drive at the same time to ensure that everything lines up correctly. So we've got our optical drive that we'll go ahead and install in the top bay. Now for this chassis, in some configurations, sometimes you can go and internally slide something in because the way it's designed, we're going to have to make sure to do this through the front, and we're going to have to remove the front bay as well as the actual front portion of the chassis off. So we'll show you guys how to do that. It's pretty straightforward, and we'll go ahead and get these guys installed into the front part of the chassis. So let's go ahead and move this along. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get this RG front base and our optical drive installed. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind is that one, we've gone ahead and removed the SSD drive cages right here. You can see I've got them right here. Just be careful with this portion right here when you depress them, which they clip in to the actual chassis itself, is that when you do that, they can be a little bit fragile and you can crack them, so you just want to be careful with that. Now, once we've gone ahead and done that, we do need to go ahead and pop off this front portion right here because we need to go ahead and actually pull through the front base, and we also need to get our optical drive installed. Now, you want to be careful when you go ahead and pop this off. There's 4 actual clips that are in place on each side, and if you go ahead and you pull out without having those clips actually depressed and not in a locked position, you can potentially crack them, and that can cause damage to this, and you won't be able to have the front chassis get back on correctly. So just be careful with that. So generally what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to push them out a little bit, and then I'll usually push in. Okay, right there. You can see right here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are your clips. You guys can see right here, we've got the clips right here. Pretty straightforward. So we're just going to go ahead and now take the RG front base, and we're going to slide it through. So we're going to pull our cables through this guy. And it will sit flush. And then we also need to go ahead and take our optical drive and slide it in here. And you kind of can slide this. So if I leave that in the open position, there it goes. Now it's locked. So that's in place. It's not going to be coming out. So we're good to go there. Next up, now we've got the RG front base. We want to go ahead and pull the cables through. Be careful when you go ahead and feed these cables in that you do not pull them, feed them too hard, where you go ahead and dislodge one of the connectors on the front base. So it'll be very difficult for you to connect the SATA, the OC panel, and the front audio connection if they become detached. As you can see right there, that's exactly one of them just kind of came out. So we're going to just reconnect it back. 4 because it makes the process much easier to do outside, as opposed to trying to get very, very tiny little headers to connect. Okay, so we're going to feed that through. Make sure to line up the top portion right here so that it actually fits in. Okay, and then we're just going to finish pulling our front base through for it to be flush, and that's it. Now we've got the ODD and we have our ROG front base installed. So from there, we're going to go ahead and just finish tightening up on the cables as far as pulling these through and getting them into their corresponding connections. Okay, so lastly right here, we've just got 2 screws that we want to go ahead and get in place just before we go ahead and start our adjusting the cables. A screw isn't required for the ODD because it is locked in place, but for the front base, I'd recommend it. The locking mechanism does work pretty well for it, but just as a precaution, especially if you think you might be moving the system around just a little bit, I'd still recommend putting this screw in here. Okay, all right, that's gone ahead and taken care of our screws. So now we can go ahead and pull the cables through. Okay, so you can see here, guys, we got 3 cables. We've got one for the OC panel. We've got, one for the front base, which connects to the OC panel front header. That's going to be on the inside there. We've got the one for the microphone and for the headphone. And then we have the actual power that we're going to need, which is providing power to not only our front base, but also the SATA power connection for our ODD. So first up, I'm just going to go ahead and run a little bit of an adjustment for this cable right here. This one's going to be running down here to the power supply, so we're just going to thread it through right here. Now we do need to take this top portion right here and feed that to the optical drive. And from there, just need to go ahead and connect that to the furthest towards the inside of the chassis. So we've now got power running to that, so we're good to go there. Next up, we're going to take the OC panel header cable, which connects to the front base, run that through the same one. Now, if you wanted to try to make things maybe even a little bit cleaner from a cable routing standpoint, it doesn't always work, but what you can try as another tip would be you can try to fit in some of these cables through the side holes that exist here on the other side of the ODD tray. You can attempt to feed some of those then through. If the cable's in long enough, you won't have the cable even actually running through here, so you won't visibly notice it. It'll run through the back end and then flow through the back. So that's an option. So we're going to go ahead and connect it here to this front portion. Okay, so we got that. And then lastly, our audio. So same thing, we're just going to go ahead and feed this one through here. Coming through the same feed and get it down here to the front audio. And you want to be careful when you're plugging those in, as you don't want to pull anything or bend any of the pins. All right, there we go. We've successfully gone ahead and run each one of those 3 leads. Okay, so we're going to show you guys a little bit more kind of optimal method as well here for you guys that are a little bit more kind of careful about how you want to route everything when it comes to all your cables. So a normal option would be, of course, to take all these cables and just run them through these actual cable routing options. But another option is actually to allow you to utilize what we noted before, which is going to actually be these kind of openings that we have here that are part of the 5 1/4 bays. So that's where we're going to go ahead and route the actual HD audio cable. We're going to go ahead and route the actual OC panel header cable, which is going to connect to the OC panel header for our ROG front base, and then actually 3 cables, which we're going to have one going to be for the optical drive, another one for the front base, and then one more. So let's go ahead and route these through here. So you want to be a little bit careful when you're pulling them through, because you don't want to damage the cable. And you also hopefully don't want to pull out the other end of the connection, which is already connected to the headers that are on the front base. All right, so that gives us 2. Now we're going to go ahead and do the first serial ATA cable. So this one's a little bit trickier in terms of how you're going to do it, because we're not going to do it feeding it through this side. We're actually going to feed it through the back. The main reason being is that it's going to be a little bit easier to just go ahead and feed this initial portion right here into that and make an adjustment versus trying to feed the entire cable through, which is going to have to go through the back and connect to the power supply anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and move over to the other side so we can route these guys through. Okay, so now we're here at the back. We're going to go ahead and slide this guy in. Now keep in mind that this is a little bit of a really non-traditional approach to this, and it's not really designed for it, so it can be a little bit difficult. There's a little bit of a tip that I have, which is you're going to want to try to pry this section once you angle this in. So we've gotten this pretty much as flat as possible. We're going to go ahead and feed this one in, and once we kind of have it resting up against that point, we're going to take something here. Probably actually better would be a flathead, and you want to pull that back, and once you pull that back, it's going to allow you to feed in that header. Once we feed in that header, we can go ahead and pull it through a little bit more, and you can see right there, so we've got that cable. So that's going to be a good option for us right there. Now we're going to need to do that one more time, because we need 2 of these leads for the corresponding serial ATA power connection on the optical drive, and then we're going to need another one for the RG front base. So same thing, we're going to go ahead and tilt that one in so I can go ahead and attempt to feed it in there. But then we need to get in there again. And feed that in. Oh. And to pull that back just a little bit more. Like I said, a flathead's probably going to work best for you here when you try this. All right. All right, so we got those 2 fed in. All right, and now we'll go ahead and pull these through and get these connected. So let me head back over to the other side so I can connect that. Okay, so now that we've gone ahead and gone back and made our internal connections there for the optical drive and for the front base, we've got these miscellaneous cables back here. So we're going to go ahead and actually run these through and get those connected internally to where they need to be. So we've got 2, once again, one for the OC panel header on the motherboard, another one for the HD connection on the front base, which is going to be for the microphone and headphones. 2 power connections for the actual serial ATA power that we have for the front base and for the optical drive. So let's go ahead and feed these through here. And they're going to go actually in the same area where we currently have our 24-pin motherboard and our 8-pin motherboard. Now at this point too, if we wanted to, we could begin to kind of go ahead and assess where some of this other cable is going to be routing to it. So we know this is going to go here to the motherboard. So I'm probably going to want to go out towards around this section. So I'm just going to feed that here, and I'll check that on my way out. And then another one here at the top is going to go to where you're going to go ahead and run it for the 8-pin. So that more or less aligns with where we need everything to be for right now. Okay, so as we can see here, we've got one up there at the top for our 8-pin, another one for our motherboard, and all the miscellaneous ones over here. So let's go ahead and take care of the motherboard first. So we'll go ahead and get that connection in there. And we've got one in there at the top for the CPU. And that one you're going to want to make sure and pull back on that tight, because you don't want it to impact your fan blade. Okay, we got there. So here we're going to run one of these to the OC panel header, which is going to be right here. It's right next to the clear CMOS. And then over here, we have another one for the HD audio. For our Supreme Effects audio implementation. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to take these 2, which came in from the front base and from the optical drive, and connect those to the corresponding points that we have available to us here. And I'm going to go with the 2 furthest connections here on the actual power supply, and the reason being is that since these will have the least amount of slack compared to additional cables which we might run out for, let's say, purposes of connecting our SSDs or connecting our graphics cards, those will have much more cable length. So here, as opposed to stretching those out, that makes more sense. I'm also kind of bringing these under the larger 24-pin motherboard power cable. Okay, and that should just be about it.
Okay guys, so we're getting pretty far along with our build here. So next up, we're going to go ahead and focus on getting in our storage devices, namely our mechanical hard drive as well as our SSDs. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and just take out one of the hard drive cages. I'm going to go ahead and flip it around. The reason why is because we want the actual connections to be facing towards that way. So we don't want it exposed outwards. We want it actually exposed inwards so that we can route the cables internally. So all we need to do is, you can see right here on the hard drive, you've got 4 points that normally you would go ahead and, let's say, screw into a hard drive cage or something along those lines. But here you can see that they're already actually affixed, and they've also got some nice silicone grommets. So that's going to help to absorb some of the vibration, minimize any kind of rattling or noise that the drive might produce inside of the hard drive cage, and also reverberate through the rest of the chassis. So pretty much just kind of need to pull it out. And then from there, you want to go back and just make sure that it's flush. And you can see right there, it's hanging on pretty solid. Sometimes these guys can get pushed out a little bit, so you want to go back and maybe tap on them a little bit, make sure that they're entirely in place. Once we've gone ahead and done that, all we need to do is slide our drive in, and that's it. We've successfully installed our mechanical hard drive. So next up, we're going to go ahead and do the SSDs. Okay guys, so next up here, we've got our Neutron GTX 240 gigabyte SSDs. So we've gone ahead and removed the SSD hard drive cages, essentially, that we have. And they're normally here in this space, which you can see I've gone ahead and removed. So normally they would be mounted pretty much like so. So they're very simple to work with. These are actually also toolless. So all we need to do is just flip it upside down. Once we go ahead and flip it upside down, you can take your SSD, and here, of course, you can see that you have the label. You're going to turn that label upside down, and then you're going to go ahead and almost slide it in, but you need to go ahead and pull back this lever. You want to not pull it back too much because you can cause it to crack, and you don't want to do that. But you'll see it kind of snaps into place, and there you go. You've now successfully installed your SSD. So we've got one. Now we need to go ahead and get one more in place. Okay, so that's going to be the 2 drives. So now we're going to go ahead and move over to the back and get these guys installed back into the chassis. Okay guys, so we're going to go ahead and take the actual SSD trays, and we're just going to go start mounting these in there. And it's really up to you as far as where you feel aesthetically they're going to fit best. You know, we're kind of going in a semi kind of mid location. We're going to leave the top and the bottom free. Now the tricky part about this is you have to line these up with their actual notches, and then you will sit these into place. Okay, so you can see we'll kind of clip in. At that point, they do rest in position, but with my experience, I've found that sometimes they can drop or they can fall. So I am going to use the screw to affix it to the chassis, the frame of the motherboard tray. So this entire tray, you can see right there, then that keeps it much better off in terms of in place. Mount our next one here. The key part is you want to make sure, because you can clip it into this place, but you want to make sure that it's actually also, that the front end, which has those connection points, right, those essentially those kind of interconnect points, interface with the chassis. So you got one more at the top, and then you would have one last one also for the bottom. Okay. All right, so we are good to go. Okay, so now that we've got actually our storage devices connected, we need to go ahead and get actually some cables to them. So first up, we're going to do the SSDs, and you want to make sure and utilize the actual straight through cables as opposed to the straight right angle based cables. Just because of the way that the SSDs are positioned, it's going to make it a little bit more complicated when you go put on the side panel if you use a right angle based connection. So we're going to use 2 straights, and then of course we've got our corresponding cables to be able to run to our associated SSDs. So let's go ahead and get these wired up. And as always, just be careful when you go ahead and get these connected. You put too much leverage or too much force on these connectors and they can crack from the PCB. SSDs are a little bit more sensitive than sometimes your mechanical hard drive in this respect, so just kind of keep that in mind. And you see that the drives are a little bit loose. They're entirely locked into place with these SSD trays. If you wanted to, they do have 4 points that you can screw them into the tray so that they're actually entirely stiff. I haven't done that, but that's entirely up to you. If you'd like to, you can do that. As I said though, they are locked into place with the design of the way this tray works. Okay, so we've got now all 4 of those connections in place, and we're now going to go ahead and feed these through the actual cable routing points that we have here in our chassis. So of course, once again, we're going to go back down here. Now this area is just starting to get a little tight, so we could either minimize running it from there, or could run it through the second point. So let's go ahead and just try the second point, see what it looks like. And then from there, we're going to want to probably go through here for the serial ATA. So let's go ahead and go into the second. And try not to cross over cables as much as possible. You want to try to minimize that just to give yourself a little bit cleaner cable routing lines. So okay, we're going to go ahead and feed those 2 in. So now we're going to go ahead and head back over to the front and make those corresponding connections. Okay guys, so now we're going to go ahead and route these corresponding cables. So first up, you can see right here we got the serial ATA. Make sure to follow the actual markers that are silkscreen on the board to make sure you're connecting to the right corresponding ports. If you can't see them or you can't read them, you can of course go ahead and reference your manual. But you can see right there at the top it says SATA 6G1 and 2. So that's where we want to go ahead and make sure to connect our SSDs as the primary drives for our system. So we're going to go ahead and first get that in. Okay, so we got our 2 SSDs in there. Next up, we're going to go ahead and see, you can go ahead and connect these. Now for this one, you got a couple of different options. You could try to kind of make it work in terms of kind of feeding it underneath a couple of different parts, or you could braid it in. Braiding in is a good option because it inherently tightens up the cable. It takes a little bit more work because you might have to unplug certain cables and braid them. But it's a nice way of having really, really clean cable routes. And for this one, we're going to go see if we can do the same thing, go back up underneath it, and then feed it back out. There we go, and feed it there into the top. Okay, that one's been installed there. Okay, so we're good. So next up, we need to run power to our, run a SATA data lead from our optical drive to the motherboard, and then from our mechanical hard drive to the motherboard as well. Okay, so last here, we've got one more serial ATA cable that we need to put in terms of the power, and one more serial ATA data cable. So we're going to go ahead and do that for our Western Digital 2 terabyte Black Series drive. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now we got our data cable. Okay, and now we just need to go ahead and feed these through again as well. Feed that through the bottom. Okay, and now we'll go ahead and get these connected to the motherboard.
Okay, so next up, we're going to go ahead and just continue with the same connections that we were going to utilize, utilizing first and foremost the ones on the Intel PCH. So I'm going to go to the next, 3 and 4 SATA. And this one we're going to go ahead and actually run through the spacing here, and then we'll pull it back out. Okay, and we'll come back over here. Okay. Got our 4 leads, and then we've got one more power lead down here. Okay. So from that stage, we are pretty solid. Okay guys, so now we're going to go ahead and pretty much almost put in our last component here, which is going to be the actual GPU. So here we've got our ROG Striker GTX 760 graphics card. So a couple of key things keep in mind is that once again, just like our memory, like our CPU, we've talked about a lot of different items that go into the system where you don't want to touch the contact area. Do not touch that contact area. As we've noted, you've got minerals and oils in your hands, and you want to minimize making any contact with connections that are going to be going into different parts of the board, especially when they actually are very important to initializing and ensuring communication between that device and another portion of the system, namely the GPU, in relation to the disk communicating with the motherboard. From there, here we've got our PCIe power connections. Okay, so that's where we're going to be running our power leads right here from the actual last cable that we need to go ahead and get installed. So that's pretty much it. So from here, let's go ahead and get this actually installed into our system. All right, guys, so lastly here, we've got the graphics card. We're going to go ahead and get this guy installed. So pretty straightforward. I've already gone ahead and removed the two PCIe slot covers. So those have been gone ahead and taken out. I have the 2 screws ready. So we're going to go ahead and take our graphics card, and we're just going to go ahead and slide it in there. I'm going to hold the chassis just so it gives me a little bit more. There we go. A bit more leverage, and now we're pretty much resting in. So at this point, all I need to go ahead and do is affix those 2 screws, and we go ahead and run the additional PCIe power. But what I will go ahead and do at this point is I will run the PCIe power connection from the power supply, and we'll thread that through. So let's at least go ahead and get that one connected right over here. We have one exposed opening. So we'll just go ahead and connect it right there. And we can feed it through this opening right here. Now, if you wanted to be even a little bit cleaner, we could run it underneath there. Maybe I might go back and clean that up, but at that point, I just need to go ahead and put my 2 screws in. All right, guys, so we're just going to go ahead and get these 2 screws in here. All right, guys, so we've already gone ahead and installed the actual graphics card. We've also gone ahead and run the actual PCIe power lead from the power supply through the actual routing hole, and now we're going to go ahead and pass it back on through to the actual side of the graphics card. So here we've got the lead. I'm going to go ahead and find a place for it, and you're going to see I'm going to try to run it up underneath all those other cables. As you can see, we've got a little bit going on here in terms of different cables, but I'm trying to still isolate the paths from them, because ideally when we go back to do cable routing, it's going to make that process a little bit easier. All right, so now we've gone ahead and passed that one through, so now I'm just going to go ahead and make those connections. All right, so here we got our leads, and this is a 8-pin and 6-pin base card. So I'm just going to pull that there through. That's one. And then one other one. All right, there we go. We've successfully installed power to our graphics card. So at this point, we've pretty much finalized the majority of our build. So let's go ahead and now take a look and see what we have left. All right, guys, so we can see that pretty much at this point, we've got our system just about finished up. So everything has pretty much been installed at this point. We've got our CPU, we have our motherboard, we have our memory, we have our graphics card. We've installed our I/O shield. We've gone ahead and installed the closed loop water cooling solution. We have our power supply installed. We have all the corresponding power leads connected. We have our additional fans connected. We have our mechanical hard drive, our 2 front intake fans. We've got the ROG front base, and we have our optical drive and all their associated cables. So at this point, you can see that we still got a bit of cables kind of running all over the place. So at this point, what we need to go ahead and do is finish running any cables that are actually not connected and run them to their corresponding connection points on the motherboards. So as an example here, we can see that we have our front intake fans, or we still have the actual 2 front fan leads that are not plugged into the board. So we're going to go ahead and get all the outstanding leads connected to their associated points, and from there we're going to go ahead and then evaluate and see how we can best maximize and take our cables and go ahead and clean them up a bit so that we have the best and overall most efficient cable routing. Okay, so first up we've got our top front intake fan. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that lead. I'm going to go ahead and run it through here. And we'll go ahead and feed it back through the back. Run it right in here under our motherboard power. And we'll go up right here to chassis fan 2. All right, so we're good to go. Now, even though these are 3-pin fans that we're connecting the 4-pin headers, this motherboard features the Fan Expert 3 fan tuning technology, meaning that we can control every single one of these headers uniquely and assign them whether they're going to operate in DC or PWM mode, so you're good to go. All right, next up, we're going to go ahead and take this one, and we're going to go ahead and run it just a little bit further down, and we're going to go to the chassis fan header directly next to the front USB 3. So I'm going to go ahead and route it down here. Same thing. Come back through to where the motherboard power is and run back to there. Okay. Keep in mind that we're still going to need a little bit of space for when we run that front USB 3 header. All right, and next up here, we've got this lead, which will be going all the way down here, down to this chassis header right here. So the one right next to the front front USB 2 ports. So for this point, we don't need to go ahead and run this back through anything. I mean, if we wanted to, we could kind of run it through this section over here and then pull it back out. Or it may be more effective to do a little bit of a Velcro tie. So we'll just see how that looks right there. And if maybe we want to look a little bit cleaner, we could go back and we could do a Velcro tie for it. But for right now, we'll go with that. That looks pretty good. Okay, and next up right here, we've got the Corsair Link power connection. So this is USB 2. But you can see that we've got a lot of extra cable going on here, right? So what we're going to first do is I'm going to go ahead and Velcro this up. And once I've got this Velcroed up, we'll go ahead and then connect that to the USB 2 header that we have there. And we'll also go ahead and run our front USB 3 header here once I go ahead and finish Velcroing this up. All right, guys, so we went ahead and, like I said, just cleaned up a little bit of the cabling down here. We added one Velcro tie here to the cable for this bottom-mounted fan. And then we Velcro tied the Corsair Link cable. So we're just going to go ahead and now get that installed into the front USB 2 header. So we can take a look. It's all the way right here. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and now connect that one. And then right here, we've got the chassis fan header for this fan right here that's mounted at the bottom. Okay, all right. So we still got a couple of leads here that we're still going to connect a little bit later on. We'll come back to that once we've more or less finished up all our cable routing. But right here, this front USB 2 header will be utilized for the front USB 2 ports that are on the front of the chassis. And then we still have to come back and put our Q connector here so we have all our front leads. So things like the power, the reset, the hard drive LED, everything will be set correctly. So let's go ahead and now head back to the back though and start dealing with a lot of that cabling that we have there that we need to deal with. All right, guys, so here we've got pretty much the entire back of the unit. You can see we've got a lot of cables that we need to deal with, and we're going to try to go ahead and work with them. Just kind of some general type of cable routing. Of course, if you spend a lot of time here, you could probably do a lot more. But you know, overall, we're just going to try to make sure that at least it's fairly well separated and taken care of. So first off, we can see that we still have a couple of different items that haven't been connected, and we need to isolate those. So one we've got here is going to be for the serial 88 power. That will be for the actual Corsair H100i closed loop water cooling solution. We've got more than enough of those leads right here, so we're okay there. What else do we have left? We've got a couple of other internal connections. So we have our front USB 3 cable that needs to go ahead and get routed through. We've also got our front USB 2 cable that also needs to be routed through. And then we have our front chassis leads, which is going to be for things like the reset, the power, the hard drive LED, and whatnot. Now you're also going to have, lastly, this one, the HD audio connection, but we don't need to worry about this because since we have the RG front base, this connection gets muted. So we're going to go ahead and pretty much pull that one off to the side. And the same thing here, Corsair's chassis has a lot of front integrated fan functionality, but as we're using the motherboard's fan controls, which are offering far more control and flexibility, we don't need to worry about any of these right here, so we can pretty much just isolate those all together. Now, of course, I guess if you wanted somehow additional fans or something along those lines in terms of mounting flexibility, you've got these leads right here that you can go ahead and utilize. But from here, let's go ahead and route a couple of these through. So first up, we're going to take our USB 3 here. I'm going to try to bring it underneath here. So again, I want to try to minimize the level of cables that it's coming through. So I'm going to try to go all the way underneath. And we're going to bring it in through this opening right here. That should be right about to where our front USB 3 is. So we'll go back and deal with that guy once we need to. And our USB and our front leads, we're going to go ahead and bring down here at the bottom. So we're going to once again lift up a couple of things. We're going to try to go all the way here. And we'll go into our second cable routing. So we've got one, we have two. So we're going to go into the second one, which is right here. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of that. And we don't need to worry about this one right here. We don't need to worry about this one right here. So lastly, we just have just this serial tier right here. So we could try to see if we could go just all the way up here, possibly with one of these. And guess what? I think that works. So we'll be okay right there. So we'll just tie that off. We'll get that. And right here, you can see that we've got a pair already. So at this point, we could go ahead and maybe get these together, but I might wait to see what else we could kind of get together. But it's not necessarily a bad idea to have multiple strands that are even sometimes smaller individually Velcroed. The main reason being is that sometimes when you need to go in and accommodate these things, if you bunch up a huge amount of cables with one, you might not have enough spacing for when you actually go to put on the side panel because you've bolted it up so large. And then two, if you ever actually need to accommodate or adjust or maybe pull some through different cables, depending on what happens, it's going to be a much bigger headache because you're going to have to deal with all the cables being released when you go ahead and remove the Velcro, versus where if you went ahead and just did modular kind of pieces that were individually tied together, you kind of keep the uniformity of everything that you've cable routed versus, like I said, having them all bunched up together. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this one right now here at the top. And we're going to want to pull it a little bit tight, have it be taut. All right, so we've got one right there. And remember, there's no really right or wrong way to do this. This is really kind of up to you in terms of how you feel most comfortable with routing everything. Might go back and tighten that one up there. But now, next up, we need to try to get together some of these primaries. So let me go ahead and just get a little bit better position, and we'll go ahead and start getting these together. All right, so we're going to start getting a couple of these together here at the top. We've got one. We can go ahead and push down this on this flat a little bit. Remember, keep in mind that you've got to keep overall a fairly flat level because when you go put on the side panel, you need to accommodate that. So I'm going to go ahead and get this kind of set here, cable tied. So that's one pair right there. This cable, I'm just going to twist it around. Won't go anywhere. Cable tied if you want to, but come back to that maybe a little bit later. Maybe come back down here. We got that front USB 3. We still haven't connected that front USB 3, so we want to give ourselves a little bit of slack. Okay. We've got this bottom bunch right here, so let's go ahead and get these guys together, and we'll see if we can't fit that in the open spacing we have here. Probably go twice on this one. See, we may be able to fit this in here. If not, we might have to shrink it down. But looks like it's fitting in there, okay. It looks like I made a pretty good guess that fit in there in terms of the width. Okay, so we need to go ahead and maybe pull a little bit more in here. Got a couple here that we can go ahead and get rid of. So we'll tie these up a little bit more cleanly. We got some Serralatier cables, so let's see how we can pull some of these in through here. We'll get that attached to the main body. So go one more here. Then we'll probably just finish those off with a couple of others down here, some of the stragglers. But more or less we can start to see how it's now kind of coming together. All right, so I'm going to probably add just a few more, probably here in the center towards the Serralatier, and wrap a couple of these up, and we'll come back to it and we'll see how it looks all finished up. All right, guys, so it's just been a couple of minutes here. So like I said, this is just a quick cable tie. Definitely could be a little bit better, but overall it gets the job done in terms of managing everything we need. And like I said, we've got a lot of break points in here, so you can still accommodate, flex something open, go ahead and make some other adjustments. I've also made sure to kind of run some different connection points to different corresponding areas so that I have a little bit of flexibility that should I need to use that, such as, you know, these Serralatiers are pretty close here. I have some openings down here if I need to run something down here. You've got just overall flexibility, so keep that in mind. Now, if you want to even spend more time, maybe some tips and tricks is if you want to pull through all the Serralatier and strand them together and then have them individually let out, and same thing, you could start to matrix them out and have a really, really, really nice kind of combination. But really kind of up to you. Overall, like I said, our goal here is just to get a little bit flattened down, at least all cleaned up and fit in to the back panel. So at this point, we're just going to go ahead and throw on our side panel here. Let's go ahead and grab this guy right here. It's very easy to go ahead and put on. All right. And that's it. We've now gone ahead and completed this side, so we're going to head back over to the other side and take a look and just finish getting those last couple of leads. All right, guys, so we're pretty much getting close to the end of this build. We just got a couple of connections to go ahead and finalize here. So first up, we've got our front USB 3 here. So we just need to go ahead and pull that through a little bit and connect that there. So I'll go ahead and do that in a moment. We've got the USB 2 right here, which is just going to go to this header. So I can go ahead and do that right now. Okay, and then we've got our front chassis leads, which I need to go ahead and line up here to the Q connector block. So I'll go ahead and do that quickly, and then we'll show you how we go ahead and connect that. All right, guys, so you can see here I've gone ahead and pulled this in, got ahead and connected the front USB 3 cable to the front USB 3 header on the motherboard. Be extremely careful when you go ahead and put this cable inward, just because the pins are extremely fragile and extremely thin there, and you do not want to damage them. This header is also a little bit large, it's a little bit blocky, so you want to make sure you give yourself enough slack on the cable that it's not pulling against the actual internal header and potentially damaging the pins or pulling against the pins. So overall, we've now got all the active connections in place. So we're going to go ahead and connect some power to the system, and we're going to go ahead and attempt to go ahead and post it and see if everything turns on. All right, guys, so wrapping up our Z97 gaming enthusiast build. We've pretty much covered everything from top to bottom in terms of you getting all the initial hardware, going through each one of the components, helping you guys understand why we picked those components, and then putting them all together to end up with what we have right here, which is an awesome high-end gaming system. So for you guys that are looking for a great resource, hopefully this is the type of content you guys are going to be happy with. And if not, I'd love to hear your guys' feedback on whether we could do something differently, or whether you'd like to see different types of content. Our goal here for the Z97 chipset, as well as for the corresponding Devil's Canyon-based CPUs, is to continue on with multiple DIY guides on different types of system configurations. So this is just the first one to kick off our first series of build videos, which is going to be focusing on an ATX gaming-oriented system, but we're also going to be covering micro ATX and mini ITX, and we may even cover a couple of other segmentations in the ATX category. As always, your guys' feedback is going to be critical in making sure what type of content that we produce. And with that, I want you guys to make sure to also check out pcdiy.asus.com. It's a great resource for you guys that are looking for more information on build guides, overviews, tweaking and tuning guides, and a whole lot more content you're going to find very useful as being a PC DIY enthusiast. Now, before we continue on, we definitely actually want to go ahead and power this guy on and make sure that everything is working. So let's go ahead and kick this guy on. And as we can probably see, there we go. We've got actually everything powering on, system's initializing, and it's getting ready to go through its post routine. So that power on self-test. Now, going forward from here, we're going to actually be focusing on additional content outside of this. This was just the first part of the PC DIY build video series that's going to be focusing on getting all the hardware together and actually getting your system up and running. In the next actually video, we're going to be covering aspects of the UEFI and tuning, and we're also going to be covering aspects of actually installing the operating system and how to go about optimizing your OS environment and getting all the drivers optimally installed. So for you guys that checked out the entire video, I sincerely appreciate it. If you guys can like, subscribe, share, favorite, thumbs up, do all that great stuff. It's always appreciated. So with that, as always, take care, take it easy, and enjoy the rest of your day.